August 15th, the meeting of the Johnston County Board of Commissioners to order, and welcome those who are here today, both in person and watching online on YouTube. And as customary for us, we open with a prayer and a pledge, and I've asked Commissioner Smith to lead us in the prayer and Commissioner Stevens to lead us in the pledge. So if you would, please rise.
Lord God, we just pause here tonight to honor you and thank you for the privilege of being here. As commissioners, we are grateful for the opportunity to represent our county. We just ask you for wisdom to make the right decisions that would benefit our people and our county. We just are grateful today for being able to live in Johnston County. We're grateful for the rain that you sent to help our farmers. We just pray for that you would be with us. We pray that our country, we need our country to heal. Somehow we hope that you would cause that to happen. And now I pray all these things in the name of Jesus Christ, my Lord and my Savior. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, the first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Any comments or questions on the agenda, or do I hear a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, I move the agenda be approved. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of approval of the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda is approved. Next up, we have 3 items on the consent agenda. One is addition to the system for DOT. We have an appointment to the Board of Adjustments of Ernest Alsbrook, and then we also have some CDBG COVID virus, or coronavirus money that we have some updated exhibits. Excuse me, I said money, but it's just updated exhibits to approve. Any discussion or any of those items need to be removed for further discussion? If not, I hear a motion to approve.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the consent agenda items as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The consent agenda is approved. Next up is public comments, and this is a point in the meeting where any audience member can come forward to speak to an item that is not on the agenda, and we ask you come forward and state your name and generally where you're from. You don't have to give your specific address, but the town or township you're from. You'll be allowed 3 minutes. Chairman Harris, keep track of the 3 minutes for me, but you'll be allowed 3 minutes to address the board, and we ask that you maintain proper decorum and make your comments in a civil manner. We also just say this is a listening time for commissioners, and I'll remind us that it is a listening time for us. There will not be an exchange of ideas or a conversation, but it is just a listening time for us, and it's, again, not intended for us to get an impromptu discussions. So with that, is there anyone here wishing to come forward and speak? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Joey Marie. I reside in Middlesex. I wasn't able to attend the August 1st meeting. However, a gentleman who was allowed to speak at both morning and evening sessions tried to spin the issue of Mr. Braswell's situation by saying some people who came here to voice their opinions were the mob and that Mr. Braswell was already convicted by those folks. For the record, we do not appreciate being falsely labeled. All the others, including myself, who have spoken out, have said innocent until proven guilty. There are only 2 people who know the truth. I don't know Mr. Braswell. I have no personal vendetta against him, and I truly hope that there has been a misunderstanding or that something else is going on in this situation. Last month, I also spoke about other branches of society that suspend those who are under investigation. Business, government, military, schools, even our local law enforcement has recently suspended a member who is under investigation. Therefore, I ask, why hasn't the same been done here, especially now that an indictment has been issued? The board has not published a statement as to why they feel the commissioner should retain his seat when others accused have not. When an action threatens the moral, legal, or emotional health of an organization, it has to be dealt with. Those who have spoken out are concerned that by your inaction, you are giving a stamp of approval to that behavior. Since no action has been taken, you apparently feel Mr. Braswell has the continued right to be here. Therefore, we would like a statement as to how that decision was made. We, as citizens of the community, come here to express our opinions, yet we don't hear from the board. We would like transparency from our officials. It takes strength and courage to do the right thing, even when a friend is involved. The lack of any response from the board is damaging its reputation. Lastly, looking at the big picture, this is not entirely about Mr. Braswell. This is also about Johnston County. Why do you feel a man who is under a tremendous amount of pressure can make adequate decisions regarding an entire county? If you continue to avoid speaking out or vacating Mr. Braswell's seat, and he is found guilty, the entire board will look ridiculous, lacking common sense and good judgment. You will make Johnston County look very foolish. Any decisions you made prior to or after will be in the toilet. The voters will have no respect for you or for the decisions you make on our behalf. Please respect the people of Johnston County and do the right thing. If you are incapable of doing the right thing, please tell us why. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no one coming forward, Madam Clerk, were there any emails? No emails? All right, we will now close the public comments. The next item up is, I guess, a report on our refund of excise tax, and I'm going to call on our attorney, Ms. Slusser, to come forward for that.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Before you, you have a request for refund of excise tax. In this particular situation, Trinity Henderson with Henderson Law mistakenly recorded a warranty deed in Johnston County that was intended to be recorded in Wayne County. The request is for a refund in the amount of $694. I have reviewed the request. It does meet the statutory requirements, and I recommend approval of that request. And I don't see anybody here from Ms. Henderson's office to speak on this matter.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the refund as requested.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
And I think you have another presentation for
I
us on the
do.
resolution authorizing the finance officer to approve the refunds of excise tax.
Yes, so this could be one of the last hearings that you've had on this particular matter. The legislature on July the 7th passed a session law that authorizes boards to adopt resolutions authorizing either the county manager or the county finance officer to grant timely requests for refunds on the overpayment of excise taxes. And staff respectfully requests that the board adopt a resolution authorizing the Johnston County Finance Office to approve such request upon review and recommendation of the Register of Deeds. Now, certainly, if the finance officer makes a determination with which an applicant or petitioner is not happy, they can then come to this board, but this would prevent you from having to do what we just did on item 4 month after month after month.
Is there a dollar amount associated with it?
No, sir.
Okay. Do we have the resolution?
It should be in your packet.
Okay. I thought so. Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the resolution as requested. It'll save us some time and hassle.
With that.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second, I think by Commissioner Tony Braswell. So all in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up we have our Public Utilities Director, Chandra Farmer, to present on the ECI US 70 16-inch force main contract award and revised budget.
Yes, we received bids on July 28th for the East Clayton Industrial Area US 70 16-inch force main project. You may recall this is a 16-inch force main from our existing ECIA wastewater pump station near Clayton along US 70 to the US 70 business interchange. This is a joint project with the town of Clayton. It's on our capital improvements plan, and we have a previously approved interlocal agreement with the town of Clayton for this project. We've worked with EDA for some grant assistance on the project on the basis of resiliency and redundancy for the East Clayton industrial area. We received 6 bids on the project. TA Loving Company of Goldsboro, North Carolina was our low bidder in the amount of $2,735,500. You can see the existing project budget and the proposed project budget. We would appropriate the EDA grant portion that was designated to Johnston County towards the project, and the balance would be from Fund 68, which is our sewer fund, to cover the remainder of the project. We are recommending the board award the project to TA Loving in the amount I previously stated, approve the revised project budget, and approve the associated capital project budget revision contingent upon EDA funding agency approval. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Farmer?
The easements associated with this, are they already worked out?
Yes, easements have been obtained.
Good.
What is the expected time frame for this project to take?
Well, of course, the county will begin construction on our project in the next, if we award and we get approval from EDA within the next 60 days. I don't recall the exact timeline for the project, but it's probably 9 to 12 months is probably the construction period on it. Then the town of Clayton, we're linked with them, and they've not started construction on theirs yet, but they'll have a similar time frame once they start, probably.
Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, now hear a motion.
Yeah, I move that we approve the request.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
I do have one other question.
All right.
What's the linear feet of this? How long is this thing? I couldn't find it in here.
Oh, my goodness. I do not have,
It's not critical, Chandra.
It's-
I'm just curious.
it's probably, I would estimate around a mile and a half.
Okay. Okay, I'm good.
Okay.
Look at my technical expert back here.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw her nod her head too, so yeah, you got confirmation about that, so we'll go with that. All right, any other questions?
If Kim said it was, then it is.
Yeah. All right, hearing no other questions, all in favor of the approval of the contract award and revised budget, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up on the agenda is infrastructure discussion. I think for those of you who tuned in at our last meeting, we had a rather lengthy discussion, and I would say we had three main things that I think Ms. Farmer's here to discuss tonight. I just want to touch on those. One, we talked about allocation of our sewer capacity or treatment plant capacity. We talked about both short-term and also long-term, and I think Ms. Farmer has some information for those. We also talked about a time frame for developments that don't use their capacity and what that would look like. We also talked about, I guess the second item, I got those A, B, and C under the allocation. The second item was regionalization, and then we talked about plan expansion and the time frame and concerns we had on that. And then I'm going to sneak a fourth one in there tonight, is we've talked about CIP, and I think you've provided us some information on the CIP, which to me is the execution of the plan, but I also wanted to bring a master plan, which to me is a policy that this board, and we can talk about that as you get into your discussion, but with that, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you in advance for the information you'd sent us and the work you and Mr. Neer have done in getting this all together for us.
Sure. So I guess we can start with the Exhibit 2 that you've received. That's the overall capacity of the plant. It's committed capacities discussed, what's on paper, and what the actual average day flows are. As you can see, our existing plant's rated at 9.5 million gallons a day. Our actual average day flow is about 6.7 million gallons a day based on our 2021 average. We have obligated on paper approximately 2.2 million gallons a day. So that's about almost 25% of our plant's treatment capacity. We do have an additional contract that will require allocation as needed in the future of 340,000 gallons a day. So when you add up those
Can I
paper
ask you a question?
Yeah.
So what are those contracts? Is that with,
That one is a Carolina Water Service contract, Winston Point area that was executed about 20 years ago.
okay,
So our total commitments and including our actual daily flows, 9.25 million gallons a day. Now, as you know, we have a new wastewater treatment plant under construction that gets us additional 2 million gallons a day that we are allowed to allocate against based on the state's policy. So what we have available for permitting as of today is 2.25 million gallons a day. Now, per our prior discussions, we have a request. We issued a request for qualifications to design the next expansion at the new treatment plant site. Our intent is to proceed with that. We're waiting on a scope back from the engineer that we selected, and our intent for that would be to have that ready to go and begin construction in 2024 as we're finishing up this first phase of construction. That's for 4 million gallons a day. Now, we're back to the issue we've discussed many times about nitrogen allocation and permit capacity. So we have to obtain the permit from the state in order to be able to construct that full additional 4 million gallons a day. We have a permit in hand from the state where we could add 2 without any more approvals from the state. But the additional nitrogen allocation we would have to secure additional nitrogen allocation, which we have a contract. As I've talked about before, we have a contract to expand our existing NPDES permit, and they are one of the things included in that is additional nitrogen allocation and evaluation and assistance to help us begin to secure additional nitrogen allocation.
so we have 2 contracts, one for the plant design and one for the permitting, or we just have one?
So they are separate. So we have one engineering firm that has done the existing plant design and helping with the construction management of the existing plant expansion. It will be that same engineer was selected to do the next expansion on the existing site. And then it's a separate engineer, a separate contract who is looking at expanding our NPDES permit. So the permitting discharge, the modeling for that discharge, and the additional nitrogen allocation is a separate
And
contract.
so we're talking about 4 for the expansion, and what are we talking about for the plant, the permitting piece? How much are we looking to go to?
We're looking at 24 million gallons a day. So that would almost double we're at 13.5 now, so that's
Right.
24. And the way our plant's currently laid out is it's where we can add on 4 million gallon a day trains. The 4 million gallon a day increments is the way the plant's essentially laid out preliminarily.
But we're going to be limited at the new site to 8 million gallons because of the effluent line that brings it back to the plant, correct?
So the initial effluent line will accommodate up to 8 million gallons a day. When we build the new plant beyond that, we would look at paralleling that line.
You and I discussed earlier the expansion of our existing facility. When the new plant comes online, we have to derate our
Right.
plant by 2 million gallons. And you indicated perhaps some aeration changes and some SCADA or instrumentation changes that would help us, of course, nitrogen credits we'd have to straighten out. Is that something that we could start a process on now? Even though I know we're
So
treating.
we have a scope from our engineer to start that design for the improvements at the existing plant, so that's underway.
Do you have a estimated time frame when that would be available for allocation?
Well, the improvements at the existing plant are not going to create additional capacity.
They're just going to allow us to keep what we got.
Right, and it'll allow us to improve operations and some operational efficiencies. So we'll still have 7.5 million gallons a day at the existing plant. This project would not expand that capacity. And our intent would be to continue to do our future expansions at the new plant site maintain that 7.5 there as long as we need to. But of course, our 20-year capital improvements plan outlines even rebuilding that capacity at the new plant site. And after 20 years, we would have one plant at the new site, and the existing plant would just be used for equalization and pumping to the new plant.
What is the effluent of a 24 million gallon a day plant that's all at the landfill look like? I mean, to construct that effluent line back to the discharge point, we're going to pretty well be tied to that existing discharge point.
Right. We will. So we'll have to pump that through the effluent line. It's about 4.5 miles, the effluent line is, from the new plant to the existing discharge location. Not the longest one in the state, probably, but it does have, obviously, there's pipe costs when you look at that. However, as we started looking, when we selected the landfill site for this, there was a lot of benefit there. We're getting out of harm's way where we are now. You know, our plant in 2016 flooded, we were underwater, and it just didn't make sense to continue to expand on that site.
And eventually that will come equalization or total?
Pump station, or we could do equalization or pump station. We want to be able to construct a facility there that does not have to be manned or staffed because of, it's not around the clock, because of the risk we have there.
To make sure I understand, you're saying that even though we're going to lose 2 million gallons of our treatment capacity that we have now, when the new plant comes online, instead of 4, we're going to get 2 aggregate. So the 2 million that we're losing cannot be recouped with the design we talked about, like the aeration and the instrumentation. That's not going to help bring that up.
So it could be if we wanted to add it back at the old plant. But with our capital improvements plan, the way we've designed to receive the sewer and provide additional capacity allocations to our bulk customers and our future planning, our intent would be to move that capacity to the new, invest in the new site as much as we can. It makes more sense as far as the transmission capacity. We're going to receive a lot of that. It's going to be directed to that new plant site. That's an option if we get there, if we need that. But the intent would be to put it to the new site. Our current planning indicates 7.5 at that existing plant site should be sufficient for quite some time, as long as we proceed with our transmission improvements that are in our capital improvements plan to divert a lot of our bulk flow and the western part of the county to the new plant site.
The easements for the effluent line of the plants that will eventually carry it to the river, are they large enough to put another parallel line, or will we have to look at a new easement?
We try to make those large enough to accommodate a future parallel line. There may be some additional ones in the future. We may have to expand on that. But we try to make it large enough to get additional future line in there.
How close together can they be?
It depends on your line sizes. Typically we wouldn't want to be any closer than 5 to 10 feet. You don't want to damage the existing line when you go back and install the new line.
Right.
And part of that's going to be how large, how large do we build the next line. So right now we already have 3 lines in that easement. We're paralleling an existing easement, and we obtained additional property for that.
Are you going to do chlorination, or how are you going to do your disinfection?
So it will be chlorination. We originally planned to go with UV disinfection. And as we were negotiating our NPDES permit with the state, they required some sampling, certain sampling they required at the river. One of those was fecal coliform sampling at the river. They specified in our permit that had to be done at the river. It's typical for a plant discharge to be that sampled at your plant, at your discharge at the plant. And the state pushed that with us and said, no, it's got to be at the river. We challenged them. We had some legal counsel assist us with that. And we decided we were at the point where we had to accept the permit and say, okay, we will do the fecal sampling at the river, but we won't build UV disinfection. We'll have to chlorinate, and we'll be dechlorinating down there.
You'll be chlorinating at the effluent site.
Right. We'll be dechlorinating at that. There'll be cascade aerator and dechlorination there.
Dickie, could I ask you some questions?
Yeah.
I'll get you off the... clearly, I don't understand this like you do. It's my understanding that the plant we're building is 4 million gallons, the new plant. and therefore we lose 2 million. Is your question about the old plant, which I'm trying to guess, which is dangerous, that if, and then we won't get another 4 million, let's say if we start in 24, it'd be 26, 27, whatever, that by remediating, if that's the right word, the old plant, we could get our 2 million gallons back to help us until the next 4 million gallons got brought on board. Is that close to what you?
That's what I was asking, yes. I would say that if we made those improvements, it only enhances the operation of the plant that we have now. So we wouldn't be wasting anything. I'm just wondering, and the question's probably better for Chandra, is do we see a point that we're going to have to say we have zero allocation available in our sewer plant, in our infrastructure? Or I mean, I know
With
it's
our
obviously
demand
possible, but do we
projections, right, that's not our intent with our demand projections. You know, our demand projections are scheduled and our improvements are scheduled to stay ahead of that, so we don't have to say, you know, that we don't have any allocation. Of course, demand projections are difficult because the capacity we're allocating, the amount of capacity we've allocated in the last 18 to 24 months is much different than what we would have allocated 10 years ago in 18 to 24 months. Of course, you know, we've tried to ensure our demand projections account for that and that we've adequately handled that. But part of that also relies on projections from the towns, you know, what they need. Our bulk customers, our 75% of the flow to our plant is from our bulk customers. It's not from our retail customers. So that's important in that our planning and our demands rely heavily on what we receive from those bulk customers and that service we provide to them.
Dickie, it would seem to me, and again, I'm not an engineer. I know you, Butch, are. It would seem to me, if I were looking at this from a business perspective, I would want someone to tell me what the cost would be to upgrade our old plant to get that 2 million gallons of capacity. I would want to know what that number is.
And I think that she would have to.
So really, the existing plant right now is rated at 9.5 million gallons a day. So we could easily bring back online 9.5 million gallons a day. The concern is the transmission to the plant. That is where we would have additional expenditures. Because right now, we can operate at 9.5, but...
Again, I'm not going to argue with you because when someone knows a whole lot more than me, I don't want to argue with them, but I would want to know what the numbers are. Whatever the impediment is, whether it's put a line in, put whatever the number is. I mean, 2 million gallons, it would be big for our county. And so I think this board, which sets policy, ought to know what that number is. So we can say, yes, it's worth it, or no, it's not worth it.
So our plan, our capital plan, the way it's set up is that with the near-term improvements, we are diverting all of the flow that's received from Pine Level and Selma and the western part of the county to the new plant site. Portion of that flow could still be pumped can still come to the old plant, but we have an option that the facility is pumped from. The intent would be for all of that flow to go to the new plant site. So in the future, the only flow coming into the existing plant would be from the town of Smithfield and the town of Four Oaks. Currently, the town of Smithfield is less than 2.5 million gallons a day. It's around 2 million gallons a day. So then if you add town of Four Oaks to that, which is 200,000 gallons a day, you're still less than 3 million gallons a day at that existing plant site. So it gives you 3 million, if we divert everything else to the new plant, you still have capacity at that old plant site for the town of Smithfield and the town of Four Oaks to continue to grow and utilize that capacity. Now, if you don't want to divert everything off of that plant, then their transmission improvements, and it depends on the direction it comes from.
Yeah, I really don't want to get into all
Right,
that.
right.
I tell you,
Well,
I got
I'm
no
just-
interest in that.
Right.
All I know is, just from a business standpoint, I got 9.5 widgets. I'm gonna get 4 more widgets. I got 13.5 widgets. Someone's gonna take 2 widgets away from me, so I only got 11.5 widgets. But that at a cost, I could get those 2 widgets back and have 13.5 widgets. It's just that simple for me. How it gets allocated is not where I'm interested in. So someone, I believe, ought to tell us to get those 2 widgets back for however you want to use it. What is that cost?
So to continue to operate that plant at the 9.5 million gallons a day, we can do it today, we could do it in 5 years. There's no additional cost to expand that plant back to 9.5. The additional cost was to get enough nitrogen for that additional capacity. You can't use the additional nitrogen at the old plant and at the new.
Whatever it is, just put it on a piece of paper, put a number beside it, and let us see what it is.
Okay, so, I mean, there's really no cost to continue to operate the plant at the 9.5 if you wanted to build that back. It would be your overall plan for the transmission improvements is where that money would be.
Whatever it is, just put it on a piece of paper, tell us what the cost is, and why, and what the cost would be to keep 13.5 million gallons of capacity.
What I understand, pardon me, what I understand is there's different variables that can create additional 2 million, correct?
That's correct.
If depends on what you can put on a piece of paper, if you're going to do the inflow or outflow or whatever. So I don't think it's, it depends on what variable you choose to go, which direction you choose to go. And in essence, we're not going to really lose that 2. We're going to get it back, right? I mean, we're going to lose 2 to start with, but we're going to get 2 back.
That's right, and we can build it back at the new plant site. We start replacing that capacity at our new plant site. You could build it back, or you could bring it back online at the old plant site.
So let me ask you,
But our plan is to build it at the new plant site.
let me ask you like a 5th grader. Let's say we're going to have 13.5, and we're going to end up, no matter what happens, 13.5. Is that what you're saying?
We want 15.5
Okay.
with the expansion that we're starting design on.
You want 15.
And we need nitrogen for the difference in the 15.5.
And there's a cost associated with that.
Right.
Okay, so I guess that we need to know what that cost association would be with that. That would be practical, right? For the nitrogen cost.
Right, for the additional, yes. And that's
Okay.
the NPD, that's the study we have on expanding that NPDES permit.
So you got to study down.
Is that a variable cost like commodities? I mean, could it be higher?
It depends on which option we go with. So if we can find available allocation that one of our partners is willing to sell in the Neuse River Basin, it could be one rate. If we can't find anyone willing to sell it, then we can purchase it through a private mitigation bank and pay a different rate.
Right.
And there's,
I was about to say just what Tony did. If we could list the variables or the what-ifs, maybe
Right.
list
Yeah.
them. What if this way it costs this way it costs that, and then we could pick and choose from that.
Will that help you, Commissioner Smith?
I need all the help I can get. I just think we ought to, this board ought to understand crystal clear this issue, which I do not think we do now. And staff can talk about this issue and that issue. We can go this way, we can go that way, we can go this way. I sort of feel like it's a halfback I'm trying to tackle that I can't tackle. But whatever, whether it be 1 option, 2 options, or 3 options, put those down to where they're clear. We can do option A, we can do option B, or option C. This is what it would cost. Option A costs this, option B costs this, option C costs this, and we can decide from a policy standpoint which way to go, whether to maximize the infrastructure for our county. And if we don't understand that, we're not doing our job. Chandra is so talented that she just, that it's just hard to get up there with her. and so I just need to dumb it down a little bit.
Chandra,
So I
one
guess-
thing that you said that is coming to me is, you said that Smithfield's going to have about 2.5 million gallons a day. If we took Pine Level, all of Selma and all off and sent that all to the new plant, it would be about 2.5 million gallons, and then Forks about 200,000. So we're at like 2,700,000 gallons a day. We're treating around 7. So aren't we going to send 4 million from that? If we're getting 7 into the plant today and we're treating 7 on a continuing basis, and we're only going to have 2.7, aren't we going to have that other plant at 4 million right off the start?
It'll be close to 4 million, but we won't divert everything immediately. It certainly will
So
take
we're
time.
gonna still have the option for going
Right,
either
and like
or.
at our landfill pump station where everything comes in from Cleveland and McGee's Crossroads, that's a station that will be able to pump to the old plant and the new plant simultaneously. Also, we're going to be able to divert some flow coming down Highway 70 from the East Clayton area. Part of that flow can go to the old plant, part can go to the new plant. So we have some flexibility within our system
Pretty
to
well
be
going to
able
have
to
to be, or
use.
we're going to overload the new plant.
Right, particularly until, the new plant's online, we start expanding, until we phase out the old plant, we're going to have those redundancies built into our system.
So I think what we're asking, the board's asking, can you present us those options for using the existing facility to whatever extent we can, as Commissioner Smith said, to maximize the treatment capacity we have for the county? Is that clear enough for you to?
And some
provide
of our
us?
problems are going to be transmission.
Right.
And we're going to have you'll have to incorporate some of those into that cost.
Yeah, I think that's what we've talked
And then
about.
we're only going to do it, but if we have the option of going either or, we're going to have both facilities in place when that new plant comes online to be where we can be efficient.
So would this be like an alternative capital improvements plan from what the county has now? Our plan outlines these options. This is what we're going to do. This is what we plan to do in these stages for this additional capacity. This would be an alternate capital improvements plan that says, okay, if we don't do this option, this is what we're going to do. Is that what we're asking for?
I don't know if it's either or yet. I think we just want to see what those numbers are, and we can decide if it goes in the CIP or not. But I think that's, and if it has tentacles that go somewhere else that we need to know about, that we're not making a decision in a vacuum, that we need to know all the ramifications for what it's, if we decide to do this, it's going to cost this. In addition to that cost, we're going to have to change this, and the CIP change, whatever effects it has. But I think we need to know what that is.
So the option that you're asking for, though, is to keep our existing plant at the full 9.5 million gallons a day.
And add 4 to it, so we'd have 13 and a half.
At 4 at the new plant site.
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
They're building it. So instead of doing an expansion at the new plant site,
No. We're going to expand in the four, let's just use 4. You know what that mean by that.
Right.
4 is going to come on in 2024. You're going to put another 4. Is it going to be 26, 27, or 28? I don't know.
Right.
Which is it going to be?
26.
26. So you're going to get 4 in 24, 4 in 26. And what I'm trying to find the way is the ability throughout that to keep the 2 that we're losing, as I understand it, at the old plant. So that we, instead of having 11 and a half capacity, we have 13 and a half capacity, for which we add 4 to it, which would give us a 17 and a half capacity. What's the number
Okay.
that would allow us to do that? Which I'm not trying to change your plan. Let's call this addendum 1.
Right. Right. I understand. So it would be a plan to keep the 9.5 there and a transmission project, what flow would go there and what improvements we need to send it to that new plant is essentially what it would be.
Are we permitted for 13 and a half right now?
Yes, our
So I
existing
think
permits.
I think that's what I think what I'm hearing is, we got 13, that we don't want to back up to 11 and a half. We want to stay at
all right.
13 and a half.
So
Yeah.
our permit says we can discharge up to 13 and a half, but we only have sufficient nitrogen for 11 and a half. Now, we purchased we only have sufficient nitrogen written into our permit for 11 and a half. We entered a contract earlier this year to get additional nutrient credits for that additional nitrogen through a private mitigation bank. That's released over time. So that will be written into our permit likely in 2024 as we're ready to do the next expansion. So once that additional nitrogen is written into our permit, it's when we can get approval to discharge 13 and a half.
But today, we're only receiving around 7 million gallons a day.
That's
and
right.
treating around. So I'm sitting here thinking that we at our retreat, we got some projections of pretty phenomenal growth in this county. And I think we need to be prepared for it. But, and I've heard you say that you don't want to get the existing customers have to pay for improvements that are not being used
Right.
in the past.
That's right.
And so, and I too share that concern, but I think that the growth is going to be there. I'm very confident the growth is going to be there with our geographical location and what everybody wants to come to Johnston County, and we can't stop them. So if we're going to have all this capacity, we need to look at our projections, and can we look at what we have got? I know you've got paper allocation, that total allocation with the 7 million that you're actually treating, and some waiting in the wings somewhere for a project from the past. Can you give us the figure that says, okay, with the 7 million and that is waiting, it could potentially come at next year, next month, whatever. Obviously, if projects run into stumbling blocks, railroads, right-of-ways, all kinds of things that delay them sometime for 2 and 3 years.
Right.
And if that sewer's going to be delayed, is there any way that we can have an in-depth look at what this paper allocation, when we could project that might be coming online, or, so we know, rather than say we got it out there, but we don't know when it's going to come in. And that way we can make better decisions, I think.
Certainly, we can do that. And page 2 of the memo I provided, it shows those our projections, our demand projections over the next 20 years, and it shows the associated projects on our capital improvements plan to create additional capacity in the green. So you can see the orange line is the projections, and then the green shows where we're planning to construct that additional capacity, so we stay ahead of that curve and can meet those demands. Now, your question, your concern with the paper capacity, y'all can see on Exhibit 3 that I provided. That's a breakdown of all of the paper capacity currently committed. And you can see I broke that down by the bulk customers we serve and the county's retail customers. So the first column lists towns, then under that you'll see Johnston County. It's difficult for us to project and control. Once we sell bulk capacity to one of our bulk customers, those bulk customers are essentially in charge of that capacity. Once it goes to that customer, they allocate it to their projects. So that's harder for us to I guess you could say, regulate and control. The county capacity you see on here is our retail customers, and I would say that we have a bit more control over that allocation and how we allow that to remain valid, how long we hold that capacity. If we retract that capacity at some point, we have gone through in the past and permits that have not started, that were projects no longer with valid approvals, we have rescinded those permits with the state. When the state issues their permit, it does not have an expiration date on it. So the county has to take that initiative to contact the state and say, this permit needs to be voided. We notify the developer, your permit's no longer valid because your project approval is no longer valid. We've done that on some. Some of those are a little bit harder to project and take away, and you can see the example I provided on here. It's a commercial park on Highway 70, at Highway 70 and Swift Creek Road. It's North Aviation Industrial Park. That project was constructed permitted 20 years ago. actually 22 years ago, it was permitted for almost 30,000 gallons a day. A portion of those lots have been constructed. So we've moved a portion of that 30,000 gallons a day to actual flow, but there's still some remaining for those lots that are not constructed yet. When those lots come in for development, they don't require another sewer permit. So there's not an opportunity for the county always to catch those and say, oh, you need more allocation, let's permit that. That's why we hold that allocation for those. They come in, they apply for service, and then once they become actual accounts, that remaining allocation goes from the remaining paper flow to the actual flow. So we have to hold some capacity for projects like that. They still have valid approvals, they're existing recorded lots. All they need is building permits and site plan type approvals for those. So some of that paper flows hard in situations like that.
I hate to do this, but can we back up, because I don't think we finished.
Yeah.
We
Okay,
didn't finish
sorry.
the new plant, old plant.
Right.
Yeah, I'd love to bring closure. I want to
Yeah.
talk about this, but I don't want to jump on. I want to
Yeah,
bring
yeah.
closure
Okay.
to that issue before we move to the next
Yeah,
issue.
I did. So the one thing I want to make sure, again, 13.5 is what we're permitted for. We only have enough nitrogen credits for 11.5.
Written into our permit.
So we have to modify the permit to be able to buy the other two.
13.5.
So that, to me,
No, we don't have to be able to buy it. We've already bought it. We have a executed contract for the 13.5.
What's the time frame that accrues?
It starts releasing, I think it starts releasing in 2023. We'll have about 50 to 60% of it released in '24. Based on my contact with the state, they indicated that in '24 we should be able to write that amount into our permit. But that's.
So there's not an additional cost to the nitrogen that, because
Not
we've
for the
already
13 and a
It's
half.
just a matter
We
of getting
paid
it
it,
in the
we've
permit.
committed to it. It's getting the state to write that into our permit.
Okay, so that takes whatever length of time that takes. So, well, yeah, yeah. Y'all can see the raised eyebrows, but yeah, that's an unknown. That is an
We
unknown.
started
yeah.
that conversation with them. They know it's our intent to, that we would like to do that in '24, because we knew that was when we would begin expanding our existing plant site. We just
Okay.
want to start doing that.
So then we're back to, we're looking, somehow finding 2 million gallons in the existing plant to use and getting it permitted so we can have a full 13.
Well, that nitrogen gives us the 13 and a half.
Okay.
I mean, if you wanted it today, then we would have to find available nitrogen allocation we could purchase from someone. That's difficult.
So we got 13 and a half, but we got to buy 2 more to use it today? Is that what you?
No, we have enough for 13 and a half. It's 11 and a half is written in our permit. We can get 13 and a half nitrogen written into our permit in approximately 2 years, and then
Okay.
we'll have it. There's no additional cost on that. It's there.
I see what
It's
you're saying.
available.
So if we do the 2 at the old plant, we're just going to need 2 more at the new plant. We still.
Right, so if you do 2 at the old plant, you've used all your nitrogen.
So you
You
still
got to
gotta
buy
buy
more
some.
to add any more at the new
Okay,
plant.
gotcha, okay.
Which we know that, and that's why we have the study that's helping us identify those sources if there are additional sources.
So to me, that would be an extra cost that goes into what Commissioner Smith was asking about. If we do that option and do something at the old plant, whatever it is, then that's an extra cost that we've got to find.
Whether it's an old plant or new plant, whatever number of gallons we got, we're going to have to pay for nitrogen credits. So it's not really an additional cost. It's just the cost of, for every gallon we put in the Neuse River, we're going to have to buy nitrogen
Yeah.
credits from here till the cows come home.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, can I ask, are we
Sure.
through with that?
Oh, well, I think, I want to make sure that you have enough direction.
I think I understand the assignment. It's if we add 9.5 million gallons a day, if we add 2 more, keep our existing plant rated at 9.5 million gallons a day, we build 4 at the new plant site, or we're not even worried about the new plant site in this scenario. We're looking at what does it cost to operate 9.5 million gallons a day at the old plant site? What transmission improvements are necessary? Well, we are looking at the new plant, but while the new plant's got the 4
Yeah.
going on it.
Yeah, and I think we're all assuming, at least I am, that if we do something at the old plant, it's quicker. I don't even know if that's even true. That's quicker. It may wind up being the same.
We just need to know our options.
Yeah, that's right. So,
I'm sorry.
I was hoping we were drawing to a close, but since you hadn't said anything, we'll let you speak.
Let me have and I'll make it quick because I'm not the engineer type, so I try to understand this. But when I go back and I originally remember our conversations, I have to focus on the ultimate goal was to transition everything to the new plant.
Right.
And eventually make a pump station out of the old plant because it flooded, and it's in the floodplain, and that's not going to change. And so I guess the question today is it faster to invest money in the old plant, or do we need to just focus on the prize and keep hammering on the new plant and stay ahead of the game and put the money where that ultimately is where we're supposed to be going anyway? So
And that was the intent
Is that a
behind the
simple way of
current.
putting that?
Yeah, it
Okay.
is. That was the intent behind the way the capital improvements plan is currently structured.
yeah.
But Patrick, we can get, I don't disagree with anything you say. I don't know what the answer is,
Right.
but that ought to be option either A or option B.
Yeah.
We just need to look at the options so we can make a decision with
Yeah, I agree.
facts. That's all I'm trying to
I
do.
think the fundamental question is does it save us time to continue to invest in the old plant and continue to ramp the 2 million gallons a day back up, or are we better off to stay focused on the new one and keep rolling? Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
If we buy nitrogen credits for the old plant, and we, at some point in time, decide to increase the new plant another 4 million, aren't those credits transferable as long as we're not discharging any additional? I mean, if we take
Yeah,
the,
your credits are based on your discharge, your total effluent
Totally. So
discharge
you
flow.
can-
Doesn't matter
yeah.
which plant it comes
Yeah,
from, it's just
exactly.
based on that total flow.
so you're not going to waste that money.
That's
to buy
right.
the credits.
Could I ask Chandra a couple things? All right, before we go in where you were going about that commercial thing, can we go to your exhibit 1? In the fourth paragraph, you talk about 3-year capacity shall be continuously reserved in the wastewater treatment plant. What mathematical formula do we use to determine the answer of what a 3-year capacity is?
No, one has not been established. We know how much capacity we typically permit in a year's time historically, and that's what has been being
Okay.
applied to this factor, but it's changing.
All right, all I would ask, if we are going to be asked to opine or deal with a sentence that deals with 3-year capacity, and we don't know what 3-year capacity is or means and can't quantify it other than what someone wakes up one morning and says it is, that's not the way we should do. Okay, so I want to be sure we're clear on that. All right, let's move down now to 6th paragraph. And this gets back to your paper flow, where you say wastewater capacity shall be allocated for residential projects on a development phase by development phase. What's the difference in a residential project and a commercial project? Why don't we have a level playing field? Why would we treat one different than the other? Why would it not be, whether it be residential or commercial, we look at it on a phase-by-phase development, and the commercial phases have to do the same thing that the residential phases have to do? So that example you were getting ready to give, where we've got, I think you said 13 million, I could be wrong, yeah, 13 million in capacity is just sitting there, going to sit there for, we don't know, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. If we have a residential development that was going to do 200 lots, they built 100, then they stopped, and for 5 years they did nothing, we would take their allotment away.
So certainly, we do try to apply that equally. This is just the residential sewer service policy, though. This specific is for residential. That's why that just references residential. And I
I'm
would
sort of
say.
using this to address the example you gave us.
Right, right. So on a commercial project, typically, that is going to be one development at a time. For example, this North Aviation Industrial Park, and that might be 15 lots. That was all phase one. That was all kind of done at one time, 15 lots, phase one. All of the streets and infrastructure were built together with one phase at one time, all permitted at one time. So we would do the same if it were a large commercial development. But typically, a residential development is more likely to be divided into phases. You know, they want to record 50 lots at a time or 100 lots at a time as opposed to 400 lots at a time.
So if we had a commercial development that was, say, 100 acres, and they're getting to be that big these days almost, or whatever, and they were going to be, and they developed 25 acres, put a
For their phase
warehouse, yeah. They had a phase two, a phase three, and a phase four. If they didn't put the roads in on phase two and didn't put the roads in on phase three or phase four or anything, would they lose that capacity just like a residential
Well, they-
subdivision?
We would permit it as it's developed, you know, as it's constructed. So they would only be permitting the sewer capacity for the sewer infrastructure they're building at that time. If they're not building it for the other portion of the property, they wouldn't have that capacity.
So what you're
Right.
telling me is if I, if I went to your office and pulled every commercial project on paper flow in Johnston County, that every gallon of paper flow that we've reserved for commercial projects, the roads are built and the project is done.
No, I wouldn't say they're all that way. I would say the majority of them are, but no, there may be some that never were constructed, that did not proceed with constructing after their permit was issued.
Okay. I mean, that's where I struggle.
Right.
I struggle. It's our job to say these are the rules of the game. Everybody's treated equal. I believe everybody should be treated equal. That's the American way. And if we say you can only treat people equal if you say we're a nation of laws and you follow the laws, and this is a law for A, this is a law for B, and this is a law for C, and everybody's treated the same way. And when you say, well, some of them are this way and some of them are that way, I really struggle with that.
Well, again, it's back to that sewer permit, because when the state issues that sewer permit, it doesn't have an expiration date. So it
I
would
know
be a
we
matter
can't,
of.
but we.
Right,
through
so
our
we could
zoning,
implement a policy
we-
that says when we want that sewer permit to expire, if they've not started construction, or whatever that criteria would be. But we don't have that policy
Whose job is
now.
it to get the policy? Is that this board's job to get the policy? Is that where we're letting you down? Or is it your job to get the policy? How do we get the policy? That where we all are treated and fed out of the same spoon?
Well, I think
It's our job.
That's right.
It's certainly our job, but I don't understand what you're saying, folks aren't being treated the same. I mean, in reference.
What did you not understand about some projects are built and she keeps paper flow, and some projects are not built and she keeps paper flow? And that that in a residential, if you don't build the project, you lose your paper flow. And that she said the reason that we kept the paper flow was because the project was built. And now we know that some projects aren't built. And so I'm saying, well, why don't they lose their paper flow?
Again, I think she's going by the policy, whatever we set, where it's correct or not. Is that right?
Right, that's
I mean-
what we try.
I mean, whether we did it rightfully, wrongfully
correct.
over the years, or however it is, we set the policy in which you enact what you do.
And typically, we don't go back and take back, the allocation once it's been issued. A state permit's there and it's been valid. There have been some that we know the project's not going to proceed, we've rescinded those permits with the state.
I thought that's what we were going to try to do tonight, to put that type of thing in place.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, there's no timeline currently on that,
Yeah.
what the board wants that to be after so many years, if they've not initiated construction.
Yeah, so,
standard
yeah,
for
so I
that.
think we definitely have moved on. I didn't know we were going to quite make the jump to a totally new topic, but we moved on from the plan expansion, which I do have a couple of questions on that to clarify, but I think you got it's not related to what your assignment was. But we moved on to the allocation. Right now, we're talking about long-term the long-term policy, and I think there was also some information I had sent out based on a municipality's kind of policy that I think we could take a look at it and implement it. I know based on, some of the numbers I just put in there tonight, we've heard Ms. Farmer say that our bulk customers are actually 75%. My policy had a plug-in number of 50, so there's obviously adjustments to be made. But to me, I think, I agree, we need to have consistency across the board, and I think in what I presented to you establishes what is the priorities for us to allocate. Here's the top priority, here's second, here's how we want to allocate that, and if so, we got to look at residential, we look at commercial, retail, and industrial, and whether they're bulk customers and that kind of thing. So we've moved on to long-term, and I think the important thing we've got a land use plan we're getting ready to adopt. So whatever our long-term policy is needs to match what our land use plan is. Otherwise, we've got chaos, which some people might say we have now. But I think that's what we're trying to avoid, is this long-term policy has got to be tied to our land use plan. And again, as we've talked about, Commissioner Smith hit on this at the last meeting too, we need to have the development community, the community in general, know what the rules are as we're going forward instead of them not understanding it. I think that's where, what we're trying to correct now is update those policies so you have an understanding and staff and developers have an understanding of what that policy is. Right now, I think it's clear as mud, or untreated wastewater, whichever way you want to go with that. But it's something that's, you can look at it. State has a policy. We have an old policy that's in transition. So I think that's what we're trying to do tonight is look at your red lines, and I know that's the residential sewer service policy, but also look at something that's more comprehensive than just the residential sewer service policy. And I don't think that's a short-term answer, but I think as a piece of that was, I think what I'm thinking this board is saying is we do want to put a time frame in there. If you don't use your sewer allocation a certain amount or make progress, then you lose that sewer capacity so that we don't have 20 years down the road that we're looking here at the project you just gave us where it's half used and you're still holding on to it and tying it up for another potential project, whether that's residential, industrial, whatever, that we've got it tied up in paper flow.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's where I got confused with Mr. Smith. It wasn't my understanding that they were taking anything away if they were allocated that sewer in residential.
I don't know how to respond to that. I don't understand the question.
Well, you said they were being taken away.
It is. If you under our zoning law, and that if you as a you lose your permit after 2 years. You just do. That's what our law says. If you have not, if you're not building the project. What I think, let me jump, what I think we need to do, and what Butch sent us, which he sent some thoughts about the sewer allocation, and then he sent us the policy that town of Clayton has. And let me read what the town of Clayton says about this. It says that this policy shall replace any previous policy on water and wastewater allocated by, could be Johnston County or the town. An allocation will expire if a project has not progressed in construction plan approval, building permit approval, or on-site construction within 12 months of award of the allocation. So you get 12 months to move forward, so to speak. Second, upon request by the applicant and at the discretion of the town engineer, an allocation may be extended for one 12-month period. That's clear. Anybody can understand that. And we need something like that. The problem we have is we adopt rules 20 or 30 years ago or 15 years ago, and the world has changed. This world has changed. Sewer capacity 15 years ago was worth X. It's worth Y today. And for people to sit on it and us not use it, number one, Chandler can't pay the debt that she has to pay the debt. When she borrows all this money, we depend on her to service that debt by making sure customers are paying for it. And when it's just paper flow sitting in a desk somewhere, there's no revenue paying that debt. And so we need to have a policy that treats everybody fair. If you get allocation, you need to know you got to do something within 12 months. You can get one 12-month extension. If you don't do it then, you're going to lose it, because we got to find somebody else to use it that's going to be able to pay the debt, the millions upon millions of dollars. I know this is not right, but I believe the capital plan you showed us was 600 million, 700 million, something like that.
Yes,
They're big numbers. Even for Dickie Bearsville, they're big numbers.
I understand.
So we've got to make sure people, that the precious sewer allocations, our towns need it, our citizens need it, and it doesn't need to be just sitting on a piece of paper.
I agree.
I agree.
Yeah. Commissioner Godwin, is that what you were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
The deadline, okay. So at least that's.
Yeah, but if we all agree, then we need to make some forward steps.
Yeah. So I think that's, and again, that's, I don't know if that's a short term, if that's tied to the land use plan kind of thing, or if we can adopt that separately. But I think if there's something we can move forward on sooner rather than later, I would prefer us to move on whichever staff, I don't know if that's in utilities or combination of utilities and land use, but we get it into places it needs to be so we can enact that soon. I agree. We've talked about this.
Yeah.
I've been on here almost 4 years. We've talked about it, and I think, we need to, somebody bring us a policy that we can take a look at.
So the intent would be a policy that matches the zoning approval associated with the project. And it sounds, that's, one component of this residential sewer service policy that certainly needs to be updated. There's a big question on this as far as, are we going to continue to allow residential sewer service, and where we want to allow that? That's a huge part of this policy. And that's where right now the land use planning, the current land use ordinance does not match this residential sewer service policy. All of our capital improvements planning, all of our transmission improvements, all of our projections are based on this residential sewer service policy and where we allow this residential sewer service. If we change this, certainly that can change projections and the transmission improvements needed and how we collect it and how we transmit it. So that's that's a pretty big question to answer too, if we're going to just update this policy. Now, certainly we can do the allocation expiration as a separate issue, certainly, but.
Shannon, you've moved from one topic
Sorry.
to another topic.
I'm sorry.
Let's bring closure.
Okay.
We were talking about one topic, which was how long you kept the permit allocation. We need to close that before we move into another topic.
Do you want that updated in this residential sewer service policy?
I don't know why we wouldn't, because we're still looking at, as I understand, if we're waiting on land use, then we're waiting on ordinances to go with the land use.
Okay, that can be a recommendation for modification in this residential sewer service policy.
Okay.
That's no
But
problem.
Mr. Chairman.
I want more than just residential. I want it residential and commercial. I
Right.
want to treat everybody fairly.
So, by way of clarification with regards to this expiration period and land rights and all those sorts of things, when we did the update for 160D, we updated the vested rights section of your ordinance, so that is current and consistent with what existing law is now. So I think we're good in that perspective. I think that what we need to look at is the policy that goes with that. And of course, and I don't want to make something a lot more complicated than it needs to be, but, vested rights, it depends on which development permit and all those other sorts of things. But typically it's 2 years. And so in your current zoning ordinance, and it talks about land development approvals and all those sorts of things, that is that 2-year period. And so, of course, there are other permits that are associated with that, and there's another part of the statutes in Chapter 143 that talk about stormwater and all of those other sorts of things that are state state-type permits. Those are 2 years. And so that's sort of, I guess, from an ordinance perspective, I think we're good on that part. I think that we need to look at the policy piece to go with that. Now, certainly if we want to do something different than what's already in the ordinance, we can talk about that, but the ordinance is up to date.
What does the ordinance say?
2 years.
2 years?
Yes, sir.
If you don't do it, you lose it.
Yes, sir. 2 years.
Use it or lose it.
Use it or lose it. And now that is not specific to allocation. I want to be very clear about that. It's about development permits. Use it or lose it.
Okay, but this is, what I just read talks about allocation of permits.
Yes, and one could say that a development permit includes what Chandra has. And so I think that what we need to do is be very specific in our policy with regards to the expiration of those permits.
Yeah, I want not what one can say. I want to know what we do say, and that,
What you do say is 2 years on development permits.
which includes allocation.
No.
It has not been interpreted that way, but I believe that it could include allocation.
But there are towns, i.e. the town of Clayton, after a period of time takes the allocation away.
That is correct.
And I think, I would love to see us do that, because that way the allocation is just not sitting there and not being used.
And there would be nothing that would prevent us from doing that.
I understand, that's what I'm trying to get
So
there.
does that go in this policy, the residential sewer service, that's where it goes?
That's where I would put it.
And so then the question comes up, how do we apply that to commercial projects for the same, to make it a level playing field?
We adopt a policy that says that.
Okay.
So I think the town of Clayton policy, they issue wastewater allocation at the time that the zoning or the approval for that project is issued. We're not issuing wastewater allocation until the sewer permit is issued, and that's at the time of construction plans now. That's the current process. We're not issuing sewer allocation when the preliminary subdivision approval comes to the board or the special use permit is issued. We can change that.
Whenever it is, it's good for 2 years.
I think one of the big issues is, and we've faced this numerous times in the last 3 years, is this residential sewer service policy was adopted in 2005, and it was updated one time in 2006. This is now 2022. I think this is where our problem is. We just need to update these policies. They're just old and antiquated, and it's the same thing with the one that we're working on now with Braston's team. What was it, 19 years? It was never touched. And so 13 years. Okay. So I mean, that's what it is. We just got to update the policy and rewrite it the way it needs to be. And I think Ms. Farmer would be glad to execute whatever we set forth as a policy.
Yeah, I think she's got some suggestions already in there, so we can add that too.
Speaking of Braston, this is thoughts from our chairman. And,
Not Mayor, there's a lot of white space there.
yeah, and, which comes again from the Clayton
Right.
policy.
Yep.
And it allocates so much for residential, so much for commercial. And then it lists how projects get ranked to get things. And we don't have this, but I think since the chairman gave us this, we're going to move towards talking about it. And Braston, one of the things that's in this project, which raises it higher up, it says projects encompassing mixed use. Residential and commercial elements may be considered for allocation, even if such allocation would exceed the limit established for the residential use. In the new comp plan you've got, there is no mixed use designation. So if we're going to adopt this or something like this for our sewer policy, it seems that we need to talk about the comprehensive use plan to make sure, and it's on page 72, which is where you have those. And we need to talk about potentially some mixed use. And then on down, later on, it says development projects with a mixed use element. And we need to deal with that in our comprehensive plan, I think.
We can certainly make mention of that and amend the policy, or amend the plan to add that. I will say, as far as mixed use, that we already have a mixed use, we have mixed use allowable in our ordinance, current ordinances, land development regulations. That is not going to go away. It will look different in form, hopefully, most likely.
If you look at this draft, it's not in here.
Yes, in that draft, it's not in the plan, but in the ordinances, it is. We do allow. Now, as far as prioritization of your sewer allocation, you can certainly, you can create that prioritization in any manner in which,
Yeah.
but we can certainly amend the comp plan to make sure
Bringing that
that's
up, that
there.
we need to think about potentially putting a mixed-use factor in our
Sure thing.
comprehensive plan.
We'll certainly do that.
All right, so at least we have at least a time frame we're looking at for revocation. I hate to say revocation of allocation, but that's kind of what it is. We've got your red lines, you've got my information, and somehow we massage that into one, maybe two policies. It sounds like we only need one for commercial on there. Any other thoughts on the long term?
There was one thing, you said the allocation came when the sewer permit was approved. Why wouldn't that be folded into design and development of the actual project? Because it could get far along down the road and then not have any allocation.
Right, and that's when it is typically, that's part of the, when the construction plans are designed, that is when your sewer permit is typically issued and approved. We could do it earlier on in the process, we could do it whatever time you want to in this process. The reason we waited for construction drawings and approvals is so we're not allocating capacity at a preliminary approval stage for a project that may not move forward. It can take, if their preliminary approval is good for 2 years, it could take them 2 years to design the infrastructure that they want to construct. And, you know, we'd be holding that allocation even longer.
I got you.
And you're dealing with hard figures because you've got the design in front of you. You know what the commitment is gonna
Right,
be.
then you know for certain how many lots they can get, how many bedrooms they want, the actual flow allocation requested.
But if we reserved a certain percentage of our overall capacity for that type of thing, by the time they get it to that point, we may have used it up and says, hey, it's not available now. Okay.
Right.
It's a risk.
Well, a lot of this problem, we're in a new phase now because developers are having to pay for their sewer at the time they get their allocation now.
No, unfortunately, so we did this, our residential sewer service policy, at one time, we required them to pay a deposit to the county in order to reserve allocation, and we had to change that because the system development fee statute has changed to the point where, at one time, we could do it when a plat was recorded. Now we're at the point where we can only collect those system development fees when they apply for water and sewer service. So we're talking about, we're committing capacity when the project's designed. It could take a year to build the infrastructure, record
3.
the lots, build the homes, or when they're ready to build the homes, and that's when we receive those system development fees to pay the debt on this, on our.
That's changed then.
Yes, that was
Supreme
pretty
ruled
recent.
on that.
I think it was like January 1 of '21, I think.
All right, so if we've got kind of the long term and the revocation, which that was my 1B and C, if we can get to 1A, the short term, which may be more of a challenge, which would include our current bulk customers. We're looking at, I'm just going to say 4 million and talk about the new plant and not get into 2 and where all that stuff is. But so what we're doing now is, and I guess we don't have a policy in place to help you decide how to handle that. And so what we've talked about is, frankly, I think at the last meeting I was probably talking about not doing anything with it, but I thought about that a little further. And so my suggestion, and I'll throw this out to the board and Ms. Farmer to comment on, or Preston, or whoever, Jennifer, whoever needs to. But we have 4 million gallons at our new plant. And what I don't want to see happen is us allocate that all before the plant is constructed.
I agree.
So I think that puts us further behind the 8 ball. So what I'm going to suggest is that we establish a milestone, and when I say we, I mean you, Ms. Farmer. Let's look at a milestone that we can say, and I'm just going to throw out a number, say 500,000 gallons of that 4 million gallons. We establish that as a milestone that we look at to see how are we doing. And in the meantime, let me back up, that we set the milestone, and that breaks down to the 4 towns that we have, we're pursuing agreements with, and also Wilson Mills, that we say, hey, out of that 500,000 gallons, you get this, the four towns in Wilson Mills each get this allocation. And then we have our residential sewer service areas that we have get a certain amount. We split it up. I'll let you figure out how to do that math. But once we get to those levels, we check and see where we are. And if we're use that up, we can decide, okay, we'll keep moving forward. We'll raise the milestone to something else. But some way we can still allow growth, particularly in the towns, since we're wanting to push growth to the towns, is we say, hey, here's the allocation that you have, approve up to that, and then when we get there, we can check, and then maybe we move forward, or maybe we get to a point that, hey, we've used all this up, and we don't want to go any further until we get it built. But some way for us to periodically check and make sure that we're not allocating all the sewer before the plant's built, but at the same time allow the towns and developments in our rural service areas to come to us and be approved and have sewer rather than, because what I don't think we want to do is say we're done and we're not doing anything for 2 years. I think it's unfair to the towns when we go to them and say, hey, we need you to sign this agreement, but we can't prove anything until the plant's built. We need to allow them to have the growth, particularly the 4 towns that we're talking about, that the growth is starting to come to, rather than cut them off at the knees. We need to allow them to grow. So that's kind of convoluted. I hope that made sense. But
Well, and as our policy currently exists, we have some disparity. The town of Wilson Mills has got looks like the way I read the policy, a real good deal with the county. That needs to change if we're going to be fair to all the towns.
well, I think we have agreement that's been out in Wilson Mills
There's
for quite some time to come into place. But I think you're right. They're in town. They're retail customers of
Johnston County. They pay their base bills and their retail
Yeah.
bill, all their billing comes to Johnston County. Their system development fees all come to Johnston County. We collect all of those fees and we do the billing for those. This agreement is structured to change how that looks in the future for the town. The town doesn't have their own system. They don't
have a
have a
maintenance crew,
permitted
don't have
system.
anything.
They don't have a system to operate. The
So
agreement
basically,
is
anything
structured
they
to change that.
approve in their town limits are contiguous, or maybe even in the.
Right, and you may
This-
recall with with that agreement, when we started talking about it, we said, you've satellite annexed, you've annexed some parcels that are not contiguous with your town limits. We're not going to continue to serve that. Stop. We won't provide sewer service to those residential developments that are not contiguous within your town limits until this new agreement is negotiated and defines what will be allowed and when you'll have your own system and
So they're cut off now.
for any satellite type
Satellite.
annexations.
Well, can I piggyback a little bit what you said, Chairman? We know all the towns that are stakeholders are at 110% now of what the allocation. So if I understand what you said in regard to towns, as far as setting aside capacity to allow them to have a portion of what's going to be in a new plant fairly. Is that what I understood?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that right now they're not all the same.
Right.
But I think that's what I would say.
I don't think you mean set aside capacity. I mean, what you mean, have a checkpoint. We say, okay, we know we have this many gallons a day we're going to allocate out. We're not saying this much is going to this town, this much to this town, this much to this town. It's all, they would come in and purchase as needed the capacity in accordance with the interlocal agreements that we're working on with them. It's not automatically reserved
Oh, yeah,
for
that-
them.
yeah.
They would purchase that, then we
Yeah,
would
But
check
if one
that.
town could really get it off, they get their projects together, right? Am I wrong? Am I
Yeah, so
thinking wrong?
that's my concern is right now, each town has a different capacity. I don't know, that's not the right term, but a different amount that they have set aside for them. I mean, it's not 4 equal
That's right.
numbers Pine Levels is different from Smithfields.
But-
So, yes,
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
that's okay.
We got two questions in front of us, and I really think we need to bifurcate them. One question is, how much of the new plant capacity are we willing to use for anything? That's a separate question. How much the towns get and how they get it, that's a separate question. I think we need to answer the first question before we answer the second question. So,
I agree there are two separate issues, so it's,
Yeah.
so talking about the first one.
all right, so
But
let's
I don't
talk
know that
about,
I don't know that I have a number. I was gonna look.
well, I was
to
going to
Ms.
take the
Harmon.
number you sent out.
Oh, well, that was a draft, so.
Okay, well, it's a draft,
But-
it's a place to start,
but
we
I
can
would-
debate it.
I would not have a problem
That we,
starting at halfway point.
yeah, that's what I say, let's, the new plant, we're going to get 2 million in,
Net.
all right, let's just say we're willing up to 1 million. That we will say that we can use 1 million, the other million we want to save as a reserve, that when we get close to the 1 million capacity, that gets to be a green light, and we don't, and if we go above 1 million, maybe it's a red light. And that we say we're comfortable to use 1 million of the new plant capacity. And, you know, I don't know whether you want to get into this policy, says that 50% will be used solely for residential development and 30% shall be reserved for allocation for commercial and industrial projects. I don't know if they're the right numbers or not the right numbers. But I just throw that out. Then I think we need to decide this issue before we move to the second issue.
So I mean, I don't have a problem if we say that, you know, the 1 million out of the 2 million net, that's our first milestone that we check. And I think from what you've said tonight, 75% is the more realistic number for our bulk.
And the reason I say that, and first off, Chandra, you're a warrior. I tell you do a great job standing up.
She don't even, she didn't even want a bottle of water I offered her, so yeah, she's tough.
But Chandra's going to, when that plant comes on 2024, her creditor's going to say, send me a check. And if we wait till 2024 to start issuing allocations, those projects aren't going to be built till 2025 and 2026. And there's going to be a gap in funding there.
Absolutely.
So we need to go ahead and let her fund a portion of that so that when 2024 comes, she'll have some cash flow to pay the bond that we had to get to build the plant.
Any other thoughts on the initial milestone being?
I think that 50% is good.
If we allocate half the planned capacity of 2 million gallons, we allocate 1 million gallons, and we're sitting there and we allocate it by the end of 2023, are we looking at the end of 2024 for the plant comes online?
Mid to late 24.
So we got another year to allocate the rest of it. But I just want to make sure that we look at every possibility, don't leave any stone unturned, so we don't have to end up at December 31st of 2024 and we're out of sewer capacity again.
The other thing to keep in mind with that 1 million gallons we're talking about allocating, allocating up to 1 million gallons out of the new plant capacity. We've got 2.2 in paper flow, and some of that is going to become actual flow, but some of that is going to go away. Typically, your required permitted paper flow is less than what it is when it becomes actual flow. So we are going to likely be, before we actually, and we'll be doing a reconciliation in January. So before we actually hit that 1 million, we're probably going to be actually permitting more than 1 million to get to that 1 million milestone.
That's the yet to be determined figure.
Right.
Yeah.
Certainly, we don't know for certain, but you know, we'll know more in January as we look as we do that and go back through the paper flows and we look at, you know, what we've got committed and what's been
So
built.
maybe January or whenever you get that information together, maybe that is the initial I mean, we start at the million, but maybe in January or middle of January, whenever we have the information, we can kind of do a check
Right.
then to make sure, hey.
That's a good
that's
time to
still good.
do an update. Once we do that reconciliation, it takes us usually through January to do that reconciliation and have data available in February to look at it closer and see how we're tracking.
Okay. And actually, if we're going to do our strategic planning session and budget in March, mid-March, we could do that while we're looking at everything else. So we got the first question answered, the million, and with the check-in in February, and then.
Did you want to do the 50/30 or not?
So, I mean, I think 75 is what I'm hearing on the bulk customers. Is that a,
I mean, 75% of our flow right now is bulk wastewater customers. We do not permit their projects based on, is it residential, is it commercial? I mean, well, obviously, we have that documented, but we don't, it's first come, first served. If the towns request capacity from us, we write their sewer permit if capacity is available in our infrastructure. I don't, the towns, we're issuing the allocation to the town, not to the project. So that would be I don't want to get into where the county's controlling anything in
Right.
the town. Just want to make sure
yes,
that's
I would
clear.
say that 75 is bulk customers, and as you pointed out earlier in the allocation chart, that we don't control that, and you just said we don't control that, so 75% bulk customers, period. And then the question is, the remaining 25%, do we divvy that up between industrial, commercial, or county, and county residential, which is only 250,000 gallons, but do we do that, and do we hold, well, we still have a million, so if an industrial project comes along that warrants a special allocation, maybe we consider that, but I'm not sure on that last 25%, and any
Most
thoughts on
industrial
what we do with
projects
that
are
last
not going to be
25%?
tremendously large users of waste unless it's a
Yeah,
process.
it's going to
that they have.
depend on the user and
What's your thoughts on the last 25%?
well, I mean, how are we allocating that out and tracking that? We're just tracking that by staff internally, or is this board approving, are you recommending we come to the board to allocate these?
Chairman, I think it's important to, stay in line with what we're trying to do with the land use plan and, creating more jobs and more industries in Johnston County, that we do protect some of that sewer. I mean, Chris has told us multiple times that he's shopping projects, and our lack of sewer is a detriment. And, we want to keep more jobs in Johnston County, and I think that's the only way we're going to be able to do it, because the residential is going to happen regardless.
I agree.
When you say it's going to happen regardless, if we don't have sewer capacity, then we're going to be into inefficient use of the land, April. So I think we have to have some. I think, when you say 75% is reserved for the town, is that history, or is that a contract, or what is that?
I think historically, what she's saying right now, that 75%
Of our actual daily flow to our plant is our
But
bulk
there's no
customer.
legal obligation about
No,
that.
No, no.
And if we're talking 1 million gallons, 75%, we're talking 750,000 gallons. Only 250,000 gallons is going to be left for industrial or anything else.
And educate me, because
Kinda.
again, I've learned a whole lot in 4 months about water and sewer. So what keeps the individual towns and cities from creating their own type of wastewater systems?
So as far as, we provide bulk wastewater treatment for Smithfield, Selma, Pine Level, Four Oaks, some capacity for Clayton, and some private utilities. Clayton has their own discharge permit, one of the private utilities does, but as far as the other towns acquiring a new discharge permit to go into the news would be very difficult. In fact, in 1979, the old interlocal agreement that was created, it was a partnership with the town, with those towns and the county to consolidate the systems. And part of that was, a lot of those older towns, they did have their own treatment plants at that time. But new criteria was coming out, new treatment was being required, so it made sense to consolidate. And I think with the state, it would be very difficult for them to get additional permits as the state continues to look at, regional planning and partnerships together. And then environmentally, those discharge permits are very difficult. The state's as opposed to having multiple ones, they look at that one,
They want
as I said,
regionalization.
regional,
They want to deal with
regional
the large-
approach.
the large group.
Right.
We've got two small towns, Kenley and Princeton, that are living with the pipe dream, that they're going to get discharges into the Little River Basin, which I seriously doubt they ever will. And they're talking about land application, but they're talking about 1 million gallons. You can't land apply 1 million gallons.
Environmentally, those permits will be very
Where do
difficult.
they discharge now?
Well, you know,
Little River.
what I've heard from the mayors
But see, they don't
of
do it.
those towns is
50,000 gallons.
they want to be treated fairly.
Right.
And I think Commissioner Braswell over there, you have a good example of Wilson Mills. Of course, that's in my district, but they did, you know, they're not one of the stakeholders in the sewer city. So they want to be treated fairly. However, we come about because, you know, they've been around a long time. And so I guess we need to continue to make sure they're treated fairly.
And, you know, the current policy is based on first come, first served. There's no percent reservation for any type of use. That's something that would have to be considered when you start looking at that. If residential developments come before the board for special use permits or whatever, you would have to look at where we've allocated out. Have we allocated too much, or is there some remaining? That would be a consideration if we're going to do that.
So I'll throw another out there other than 75%, which maybe get us back to out of the number 50%. If I look on Exhibit 3 that you talked about, if I look committed in the last 3 years to our four municipal bulk customers, that's a hair over 400,000 gallons in 3 years. Counted for accelerated growth, I think 400,000 gallons in the next 2 years would probably be, I don't know if it's a reasonable number or not, but it's not, it's somewhere in the ballpark. So maybe the 50% number for them works, is a little above that. So to me, that looks like a reasonable number to get us 2 years down the road. And I don't know what kind of uptick you were thinking may happen in the next 2 years, but
So you're
that seems
thinking
like
go
a
back to your
reasonable.
50%.
Yeah, that gets us into that 50% number to set aside for our municipal bulk customers, and 500,000 to be used for, I mean, if it's all 100% set aside for industrial, but you got to, when you set aside for an industrial, yeah, I know, I hope that's coming, but then you get back into the revenue, potential lost revenue if it's sitting there and people are paying for it, so, but
Well,
just the
I'm sorry.
50% seems like a more reasonable number for our municipal bulk customers.
Mr. Chairman, though, again, it gets back to that land use plan. Once that's finished and we've adopted it, that might push more denser development to those towns that require more than what they've been doing. And they need to be prepared for that possibility.
But, yeah, I think that's,
Got an extra 100,000 gallons from what
Yeah.
they've been using 3 years.
yeah, so I think that's, I mean, I guess when I think the 50, reason I like the 50% now, after looking at the history, is we've got that check in place. So if we see that, come next March and after we get the numbers in, hey, we need to adjust.
Yeah.
That we can make that adjustment if our land use plan and when for some reason something changes, we can make that adjustment then. But I think as we're sitting here today, I think that 50% is probably
Mr. Chairman, I
decent
think,
number.
that's fine. I think what we need to realize is whatever number, whether it's 50 or whatever, it's 30 days down the road, we can change it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we don't have to get it right forever.
Yep.
We just have to make the best judgment we can tonight, and if next month we need to change it, we'll change it, or if the next month, I mean, it's not in stone.
Another consideration when you're discussing that is too, when you talk about industry, the industrial flow could be coming through a bulk customer as well. So that could go either way when you're considering that one.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question, and this is going to be an odd question, I know, and I'm an odd person, so I get that. But, and I just want to, and I'm not speaking for the whole board, it's just for myself. I've thought a lot about this, and there's almost like this crisis in my mind that we're going to suddenly run out of sewer. And this is probably an unfair question to ask you, but based on your plans and all the long-term proposals that you've brought before the board and you've laid this out. I want to make sure that I'm not manufacturing a crisis in my mind, that we're not in as bad a shape as I think we are. And I think this board is doing a good job by staying ahead of it and making sure that we're not going to reach a time that we have to tell a town or an industry that we have no sewer capacity, and Chris is out selling the county and we've got no. Do you understand what I'm asking? What is the likelihood that we're actually going to run out of sewer capacity? I mean, that's probably an unfair question.
All of our projections and all of our planning, again, back to page 2 of the memo I provided,
Yes.
we're showing that we continue our planning, we continue to implement our projects to stay ahead of
We
that
stay ahead of the
demand.
game the whole time.
Right, and now, one piece that's important, especially as we implement these new agreements with towns, is that they give us their input. They know their growth plans better than we do. And if they give us their demand projections and their growth projections, and we can implement that back in our CIP, because we're going to be updating the CIP routinely. Then that's critical information to have to ensure the county's not planning for them. We're not doing their projections. We want to make sure we're accurate with what we've included, but they've got to also, give us their projections and what they see and envision.
And in one response to Commissioner Harris, Smithfield and Selma are already telling people they can't provide sewer for them. They're actually turning projects away.
Right. So there are pieces of the transmission system that are at capacity in some areas. So we have to be very clear when we talk with people and future developers about that. Is the issue a treatment issue, which is not, we're still allocating treatment capacity, or is it a transmission issue? And are there options, short-term or long-term options to remediate that? We've got certainly our long-term plan, and the projects that we currently have under construction will allow for additional transmission capacity for all of those towns. But, what kind of options do they have short-term? Can they route it another way if they have to have this, if their flow is going to be online before, the end of '24?
Because you're rerouting a lot of the existing towns to free up transmission capacity for Smithfield and Four Oaks and those areas
Right.
like that. So if their issue is transmission, then that's going to be resolved
Right.
based on the current projects that are already in the works.
Right.
But may not be completed by 2024.
Well, looking at, 24, so 2 years, it depends on what size project that they have that they're trying to permit. Most projects right now, if they're just trying to get zoning approvals, site plan approvals, and then they have to construct, a lot of that could be 24 till a lot of that would be actually flowing in the pipe.
And I guess, Commissioner Harris, my response to are we manufacturing a crisis? All I know is looking forward for future boards. I don't want them to be sitting here, or us to be sitting here 2 years from now doing the same conversation, or even 4 years from now, that we've hopefully addressed it now, and there's not a crisis in 2 years or 4 years, and when growth is more than we anticipated, and land use plan changes and we need more. The land use
we're in a
plan
whole
could greatly
different-
affect.
We're in a whole different
what we do.
ballgame now because we've got supply issues for these projects. We're telling, the first time I've ever had people tell me the manhole delivers 15 months out. The ductile iron pipe, they can't even give you a delivery date on. So, and this is unprecedented in this industry. It's unprecedented. So we don't know if those projects are going to be drug out because of supply issues.
Certainly, we can face those
Let me clarify too. I think the board's doing exactly what we need to be doing. I think this is a great conversation to have, and we need to be focused on this going forward. Just for my clarification, I just want to make sure that I was not viewing this thing worse than what it really is, because when I read your plans and I look at all your information and all the presentations you've made in the last 3.5 years of this board, I have a confidence that you're ahead of the game. I really do. Now, we may make some tweaks and adjustments along the way, and I think that's good, but ultimately, I don't think everything was horribly broken. I think we just need to be vigilant.
We certainly lost some time when our plant flooded with Hurricane Matthew. In 2015, early 2016, we planned to expand our existing treatment plant on that existing treatment plant site. We were going to cram 4 million gallons a day in there some way, somehow, bring in, it was going to be done. We could do it. But it was not the right thing to do cost-wise or environmentally after after that plant went underwater, and we realized the risk that we have. That's not going to go down. That risk will continue to increase.
Yeah, we
And that was
increased
not
the
the
dike
thing to
height
do.
after that.
Right. So we did. We have raised the dike. We finally completed that project with some FEMA funding to raise the dike to offer some more protection. But you have to remember, we still have issues with access. We couldn't really raise the road as we should. And then we can only raise the dike a certain level when you've got aeration basins that right now are the top level on one side. You know, we don't have a dike around the entire plant. We've got aeration basin walls on one side. So really, we're only protected to that level. But it was just not the thing to do after Hurricane Matthew. It was very clear then. And so that delayed the process by going to a new site, whole new design, whole new treatment process, whole new effluent line. It just really added probably 3 to 4 years to the project for that additional treatment capacity.
Are we going to ever use the land we bought on the other side of the river for
So
expansion?
that's where our cascade aerator and our dechlorination facilities will be. And then we have that there for if we need future equalization or pumping.
Okay, so if we can go back to the short-term policy that we're talking about, we got the million, we got the 50%. That leaves us with the other 50%. And I don't know if that can be vague enough to be at the discretion of the board, because I know we have development in our residential sewer service areas that we could consider. So I don't know if we just leave that between industrial and commercial, and then make that a category for all three of those, and it's our discretion what we do with it, since that will be kind of precious.
Almost like a special use permit.
I would recommend we do that, but that we keep it balanced as to those three uses in that 50%. I just think we got to have enough judgment as a board to be able to make those decisions.
So now all those projects gonna come to this board for allocation? Or is staff gonna be able to allocate like they
So-
used to?
I was gonna say, how often do you tweak it when that mill gets off the trail?
Yeah,
I'm just
I
asking.
think that's a good question. And I think that if we're at this level of discussion, it probably needs to come to us for approval as we're going through this transition process in the
Each
short term.
sewer each
No, I'm not-
permit allocation? Or
I would say if
each
it's
time we
in-
change that percentage?
I would say if it's in the residential sewers, it comes to us anyway, if it's in the
Right.
residential sewer service area. So
Have to
that wouldn't be anything else that other than industrial requests. Am I correct on that, Braston?
Municipal transition district,
That comes to us?
it does not.
Who does that go to?
Planning board. The planning board can be made aware.
So I would say that needs to come to, I would say that needs to come to us if it's in the
Planning board can make-
municipal
I mean,
trans.
We can make the planning board aware of the direction of the.
Yeah, I think if it's a precious resource as it is, it definitely needs to come to us. In the short
Even
term.
commercial and industrial, institutional churches, retail?
I think Butch is right. I think in the short term, as
Yeah,
precious as it is, we need to be able to manage it.
Yeah,
Well, it kind of goes back to how we got down this road was, just a couple months ago, having a zoning request, and we're all going, stop, why are we getting ready to rezone a property when we know there's no sewer? We need to stop and get a handle on this first, and I think until we do, we need to make sure it's managed.
yeah. Yeah, because I think if we don't, we're back in the same boat we're in, where people are approving it and our hands are tied and we're watching it go away.
Yeah.
So I would say for the short term, let's get that come back to us.
All sewer requests for sewer permits would come
Yep.
here. Okay.
Ms. Slusser, did you have a comment? You leaned in and then you leaned back, so I didn't know what that meant. With Commissioner Smith, I know what that means.
Well, I apologize. I was talking to Mr. Newton. We were talking about the practicalities of how we can make this work, and I think that we can. I just think that perhaps the three of us need to talk to make sure that we're doing it the way that you wanted. What we were talking about, and I apologize for that, but what we were talking about was the municipal transition districts and how those go to the planning board and how we can deal with that with regards to the allocation. And one of the thoughts that we were just discussing is that when those projects are coming to the planning board, the majority of those are conditional approvals anyway, right? Because they're not all, usually they have not done every single thing required for final plat. Why would they, if they don't know they're going to have a project? And that could be a condition of the approval. The sewer allocation piece could be a condition of that approval. But I would want to talk through with staff to make sure that we have a system in place that is workable for both you and for the customers that we serve.
You know, the one thing that kind of gives me a little concern is we're talking about someone that invests a tremendous amount of money in probably purchasing a tract of land, hired an engineer, doing all their environmental impacts, checking for wetlands, endangered species. Then they get into a design, most feasible design, and then they come to you and they say, okay, now we've got all this done, we spent all this money, and here's what we want you to look at is look at the sewer system, we send it to the state, they send their sewer system to the state, it's approved, and at that time we think, we don't have sewer capacity. That's going to be that's not fair to our constituency when that happens. They spend a lot of money at that point. I think there should be some way to say, what is your maximum and what do you think this project is going to be? And you don't permit it, but you just say, okay, you can proceed.
And we do a lot of that. You know,
Yeah.
we certainly talk to people ahead of time. We work through it. We say, okay, this is what we have available right now. These are our plans. This is what's going on. This is what it looks like. It's permitted first come, first serve. Certainly, if we change that process, I'd be more hesitant in telling people it's first come, first serve. I would say, all right, it's got to go to the board. The board will, determine allocation. And I think, like Jennifer said, we need to talk through that process as the timing when we bring it to the board, how we handle these.
Yeah, because I think, at least my intention is for you to be able to say with specificity, the board approves this, rather than, well, state says we have this, we can do that, and then we're saying something different, that just everybody's on the same sheet of music going forward, and whatever that is, it's what it is. But I think this board has the final, authority to set that policy, and I think that's what we need to do. So
I think we'll have to be careful to make sure that we're being fair to everyone who comes
Yeah.
on the board, because right now I can understand first come, first serve. That's pretty easy, but
Yeah.
it's going to have a lot more subjectivity.
First come, first served may not be what's in the best interest of Johnston County.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just saying.
And I think we have a precious resource, and there's a lot of judgment as to how we build a better county.
Well, and I think this way it's collaborative and it's transparent.
And another thing, if zonings, rezonings are coming to this board, if you're zoning it, you're approving the use for commercial zoning, maybe we somehow link it with that, because you certainly I wouldn't think, want to issue a zoning approval, then the sewer permit come back at a later time, and that be a separate issue. I think we would have to have that information up front. Again, we're back to the point where they might rezone and they may not decide to build their use for some time period, so we are extending out additional paper flow likely for a longer period, but I think we
So
can
we'll let
work
y'all
through that process. Yeah.
figure out a recommendation for how we do that, so.
I think Raleigh actually asked for proposed sewer flow
Right,
at the beginning of the project, at the onset, when they looked, the first review,
right.
whatever, they asked for what is the anticipated sewer flow for this project.
Yeah, so,
You don't allocate it at that time, but you've got an idea, and you look at, okay, we can tell you right now, we don't have that, don't spend your money.
Yeah.
yeah, okay. So by my count, we've knocked out 3 of the 4 things that's on your list to present to us, which leaves us with regionalization.
So, as you recall, the board has engaged Black & Veatch to complete a regionalization study for the county, and J.D. Solomon is working with the county managing that project. He's been working with Black & Veatch and directing them, guiding them, and reviewing their information. They have met with all towns. They've gathered a lot of data, is my understanding. They are ready to put together their findings, report of findings, and it's my understanding J.D. is reviewing that, and we should have that data any time now within the next couple of weeks to be able to present to the board. But they met with all of the towns within the county. They met with county staff about our infrastructure. They met with the private utilities within the county to evaluate, what kind of options we may have as we move forward.
Okay. And I had a couple of questions on that. One is, the first one goes back to our plant where we're looking at ultimately permitting 24 million. I'll say ultimately. We're going to permit 24 million. Is that the ultimate build out, or is the ultimate permitting capacity? Are we looking beyond that?
Well, that's what we've projected for the next 20 years. There's additional room on the plant site. If we wanted to go beyond that in the future, we likely could. We may have to work with some of the other existing facilities in that area on relocation to continue to expand there, but likely we could go beyond 24.
So, I guess in your opinion, the 24, is that something we've had, I'm assuming it is, concrete conversations with DEQ that 24 is a
We're trying to
reasonable
talk
number?
with we're trying to get the DEQ to talk with us. That's what we hire our consultant for. So the study's underway.
So if there's anything this board can do to help get that conversation, because I think that's, if we're planning on 24 and they're going to tell us, no, you're not getting 24,
Right.
you better plan for 16, then we've
Right.
got to change gears, which kind of brings me to what I want to talk about is the regionalization. So the reason it's important is because we may think one thing and DEQ tell us
No.
something we don't
Right.
want to hear.
Certainly.
So the regional piece, and I'm going to tie this into the CIP, we've talked about that, and that's kind of the execution of the plan. And then for me, as part of the talking about a master plan for the overall is something this board can set a policy on. And I think that's the part for me that we need to look at other, not just within Johnston County, and particularly not just to the Neuse River, that we look at other opportunities. And I know there's one to the south right now, but we take a look at those, and that's something I think we can set in that master plan is, hey, we want to look beyond our borders for opportunities to secure water, sewer discharge, all that for it. So I think the regionalization is important, and I'm looking forward to seeing what that, and I know it's phase one, there's multiple steps beyond that. That's just the beginning. But I think for me, the piece, and again, it's all tied to the master plan, is the land use plan update. We got the land use plan is critical, but for us to follow that up with some sort of master plan that this board can set, because frankly, $700 million over 20 years, is it 20 years or 30 years? $688 million.
The capital, 20 years.
20 years. That's a lot of projects for us to be able to follow what goes where. But if we know that, the priority is we want to, and I'm going to just make stuff, but we want to be able to look at interbasin transfers and how we manage, how that can help us. We want to look at, and I think from the land use plan update, they looked at intersections along I-40. If that's what if we're going to change our residential sewer policy, that those areas get serviced as well, then we need to account for that in our master plan. But somehow to work towards developing a master plan that this board can establish the policy, and yes, the CIP can dovetail right into that. But I think it's a lot easier for this board or the next board or whatever to look at a master plan and understand that than it is to look at all the details that you guys looking in the CIP and know that like the back of your hand. And we're going to see 700 million, 20 years, and see a list of projects this long, and somewhere about number 5 we quit.
Well, I
reading.
think one important piece of that is our long-term water supply study that we've not talked about tonight. That's underway. We have a consultant looking at that, a 30-year water supply plan for us. Actually, does it go to 50, 30?
Does it include something other than?
It
the
includes
news?
lots of options, and it does include other than the noose as far as an option to evaluate. What it will do is just refining those options. We're putting numbers, costs associated with those options, and capacities, ultimate build-out capacities associated with those options, and then we'll bring those back to the board so you can see what we've done with those and look at those alternatives to ensure, what direction we want to go in the future with that.
So I'm assuming that includes Wilson.
It
Now,
does.
does it include interbasin transfer from?
It does include that, some
Okay.
initial evaluation of that, but our intent is when we jump off into very large project for future water supply with a very large price tag on it, it will be an option that will meet this county's needs for a long term, long time. And so that's what you'll see when we bring that back to discuss those details. We're actually meeting with the state in 2 weeks on those options, and once we talk with them a little more, our consultant will be able to refine some of that and bring it back.
And does that, so our current plan at the Tim Broom facility, was that 18 to 24 million? Is that what?
So we have a project out right now, request for qualifications to take that from 14 to 18 million gallons a day. That's where that would be, is 18. That's short term, that's as far as we can expand that out based on the flows in the river, unless we do some different additional work, and we'll explain that in those long-term options. But for now, it would be 18 right there on
Is
that
that, you
site.
think that's, once we get to 18, we're not far from maxing out?
Yeah, 18 will max out that plant site short term.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think that anytime we talk about interbasin transfers, we're talking about going into another county, and I think we all know we're talking about the Cape Fear, zero nitrogen. It has no nitrogen limits.
Correct.
And we're going to, but I really think that it would behoove us to have some conversation with the leaders in Harnett County before we discuss that so many times and just assume that they're on board with us, to make certain that we do have a spirit of cooperation between the two boards, because then when we discuss it in public meetings like this and someone from Harnett County hears it, you could get a lot of flack and a lot of bad PR from John Q. Public, because they hear we're making plans to take water from their river and put discharges in their river, and we haven't even had
So I will
dialogue
say,
with them.
there has been conversations,
It
so there has been conversations with Harnett County done in particular. We've got our own towns involved in it.
I remember the I-95.
So there has been discussions, and including Cumberland County and PwC have been involved in conversations. So those conversations have taken place so far. There's been, seemed a spirit of collaboration in that. So I think that is a good sign. But that you're right, that it doesn't take but one of those to mess it up for us, and that's not an option. So I think that's something that I think Ms. Farmer has some ideas on how that would be even more effective. But again, we've got to get that rolling. And I know from, at least from my conversations and understanding of DEQ, that regional process is one that they want to see happen, encourage that to happen.
They're
So,
more apt to make, review and approve larger entities than they are these little.
yeah. Well, I think
Small
Ms.
town
Farmer
thing.
mentioned that earlier, the likelihood that some of these smaller towns are going to go and get a wastewater treatment plant permitted and discharge is probably pretty slim.
Yep.
Because DEQ's looking at that regional approach on things. So any other questions? Chandra, do you have any other?
I don't think so. I think I've addressed what we previously discussed, but I'll be happy to answer any more questions.
All right, so let me just kind of make sure I don't miss anything. So a couple things, three things I have that we're looking for is the plant options for what we can do with the existing plant, the costs associated with that. Then we've talked about, as far as policies, and I was going to say revocation, but the time frame, the 2-year time frame that we're talking about using. We've talked about the long-term policy adjustments to the residential sewer, and also doing something on commercial. And then the third thing is our short-term policy to get us through the next couple years on how we allocate that. So those are the 3 things, maybe 4 if you separate the revocation and long-term, but I think that's in the same. Actually, I think that's probably in the short-term as well. So those are the things that I have that we've tasked you with tonight. Any other comments or thoughts?
I think you've summarized it well. There's 2 major things that could have a big impact on where we go from here, though, and that's negotiations on regionalization and that land use plan, how it shakes out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say, the other thing that we've got is the agreements with our bulk customers, our municipalities. that at least I understand that we're maybe close on some, and I would say, and I'm gonna speak for the board on this, but look to September for a deadline for having those agreements in place. I think it's roughly a month. Does that seem, I won't say, does that seem reasonable? I know you've been working on for 2 years, so that may seem a little quick.
I think we don't give them a date, we're never gonna get
Yeah.
anything done. We need to be steadfast on a date, set that date, and say, okay, don't plan on any sewer until you sign your agreement after that date.
Has there been any movement since our last meeting?
I think Jennifer's had several conversations.
Okay.
I have, and I think that we're making progress. I think we're making good progress. I have talked with the attorney for the three towns, Four Oaks, Pine Level, and Selma. I've talked to their attorney, and I think we're hammering out final details on that. With regards to Smithfield, we've had some very good meetings to have conversations about moving that forward, and we've got some proposals going back and forth. So I'm comfortable with saying a September timeframe in which I will tell them that we need to get these done, because I feel like we're in the short rows with regards to at least the issues as I understand them.
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversations back and forth with Smithfield, the town manager, Bob Spence, their attorney. It's moving pretty rapidly. I think we'll be able to wrap it up.
What are we gonna do about Wilson Mills? That's gonna be a whole different animal.
Well, I mean, we got that, but there's an agreement in front of them too, so I would, this is just my opinion, is we got I don't know when our second meeting in September is, but I think that's probably a good deadline. If there's no agreements, then the policy doesn't apply. There's nothing,
I think it's the 19th.
nothing.
19th.
19th. So is that reasonable? I mean, I think from us, we need to wrap it up, and I know this has been out there for a couple of years, and at least for Wilson Mills, it's been out there for at least a year, maybe the same 2 years, but something to bring it. And I would say that, and I don't know how we do this, but even for the Wilson Mills situation, we need to have somehow make it clear, we need to have an agreement for continued.
We'll communicate that message.
Okay, good. I'll just, for Ms. Farmer and Mr. Renier for both senators, thank you for getting the information together and for standing up there for nearly 2 hours.
Yeah.
I'll compliment the board as well. This is something we've talked about in bits and pieces, and all been equally frustrated that we're not getting anywhere. And I think tonight we have moved the ball down the field, so praise the Lord for that. And then when you get this board to agree and getting stuff moving down the road, but I think it's been a long time coming. 2000, what'd you say, 6?
Yeah.
13.
Regional policy was adopted in
Yeah,
November.
yeah. So
I think Chandler does a great job when you throw these questions at her. She's got to pull those figures. I know it would be real easy to make an error here and there, but I see she's got her act together.
yeah, as Commissioner
I've
Smith said,
always
she's a
impressed.
warrior.
Yeah.
And I'll say Kim back there too as one as well. So thank you for
Thank y'all.
enduring all the questions
Thank y'all for all you
tonight.
do.
So, all right. So next up, we're finally up to manager reports and comments. And Chad, we're going to turn it over to you to fill in for Rick, who, by the way, I didn't mention is home under the weather. So Rick,
Yep.
hope you're
Shout out to
Hope you're
Rick.
feeling better soon.
So we have two items under manager comment. I wanted to update you on the municipal proposals we have received. We received proposals from 7 different towns. Staff is currently examining the projects to ensure that they meet the minimum standards of the RFP have been met, and we will provide an update once staff has finished that analysis, and we'll provide you a list of all those towns and those projects. Once it's available, we should have something in the next week or two for you. And then from that point, we'll decide on how we go selecting those projects and move on down the road. But
This is where we allocated $5.5 million to be
$5.5
spread
million,
out.
yeah.
Okay.
and we received, like I said, from 7 towns.
All right.
And that's all for that one. The other one is the Facilities Operations Building. We received 4 RFQ responses, and staff is currently examining those to ensure that the standards have been met based on the RFQ. And it's similar to the Public Safety Center detention project. We'll look at those. We'll examine to make sure that they've met the priorities in the RFQ, and we'll provide an update once we have that done as well. But we've received four good proposals and responses, and so we'll have somebody good to choose from.
Good.
Let's remember the fourth word in that proposal there. It's a warehouse.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And that's all I think we have for manager comment, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any
Yeah,
questions?
Chad, let me ask you a question in regard, we closed on the Cox project, land. I think last meeting you said, the manager said there was some couple of mobile homes that had to go.
Right.
And then I do think y'all had a plan for that old house possibly of having a controlled burn on that. Is that correct?
I can address that, Mr. Braswell. I've been
Okay.
handling that piece of the project. So there's an RFP that is out right now for remediation of that site to get those mobile homes in that house down. After further conversation with Director Hubbard and it was determined that it would be in the best interest of the county and the citizens in that area for us not to do a burn. So we've had all of the initial examination of those properties done. The septic tanks have been marked. The asbestos testing has been done. All of those sorts of things. And we anticipate. This mic happens to me every meeting. We anticipate that this will be taken care of. I think those responses come back this week. And so we will be in a position to get that property remediated the way that it needs to be. Keep in mind, as we're doing this RFQ process and those sorts of things, the very first thing that the engineer/architect will be tasked to do would be site evaluation to make sure that we can do what we want to do on the property. But all of those things are moving forward. We've been trying to keep the ball rolling as the board had asked.
And am I correct in my memory, this is going to be where the facility?
The logistics facility, yes, yes, sir. So that's office/warehouse for that is what we have in mind. And of course, that will develop as we work with the project team that you select.
That will be subject to the RFQ and looking at the property to make sure that it's large enough to do everything that's got to be done. And we do own some other property over there that could be utilized if need be. That's across the road, near the
Across from John Deere.
across from John Deere.
That's right.
And this RFQ will cover that as well, is that correct?
That is correct. We asked for site analysis on both of those parcels.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
We'll have a couple of plans for you depending on the needs of the building.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job filling in. Now it's time for board reports and comments. So I'm going to, instead of starting this side tonight, Commissioner Smith, I'm going to start on your side.
Okay. I'm sorry that it's so late tonight. But we've had a lot of interesting times with the school board. And so I wanted to do some research, the drama. And this is County Municipal Government of North Carolina, which is published by the School of Government. So I want to use this for a couple of things to deal with. As I understand it, the issue is $8 million. And the very basic thing, first off, it's that the Board of Commissioners is not required to watch a Board of Education meeting to get its information. I want to be sure of that. We're entitled to have that information in this room right here. And so the county board is a local tax levying authority for the school unit within the county's territorial boundaries. So that's our responsibility to levy taxes for them. It says, although county commissioners are not officially educational policy makers, they nonetheless influence policy through the local budgeting process. So we just need to understand that the budgeting process is not just about money. It's about, that's where we, on behalf of our citizens, have a chance to influence policy. So with that, let's go to, first off, the fact that we've adopted a budget which they sent to us. That $8 million was not part of the budget. And so therefore, there has to be an amendment. So it says that occasionally during a fiscal year, a local school board will want to move monies from its capital outlay funds to its current expense or vice versa in order to cover unexpected expenditures. A local school board is prohibited, however, from transferring money between these two funds, except under limited circumstances. A transfer may occur if all of the following conditions are met. And that comes out of this statute right here, North Carolina Statute 115C-433, amendments to the budget resolution and budget transfers. That a transfer may occur if all of the following conditions are met. 1, the funds are needed to cover emergency expenditures that were both unforeseen and unforeseeable when the school budget resolution was adopted. 2, the local Board of Education receives approval from the County Board of Commissioners. And 3, the local Board of Education follows certain procedural requirements, which is to have a resolution that gets presented officially to this board. Not by email, but officially presents a resolution to this board to amend its budget request. So that's what needs to happen to transfer funds. Now, there's a lot I could go into tonight, so I'll try to make it short because it is late.
Please do.
But one of the issues is that the Board of Commissioners, pursuant to GS 115C 429C, Board of Commissioners may request information from the local school unit about its proposed budget request. In fact, the county board has broad authority to obtain from the local Board of Education all books, records, audit reports, and other information bearing on the financial operation of the local school administrative unit. It may also specify the format in which the financial information must be presented. And I'm going to recommend that we ask the school board to present to us the operating funds they had on hand at the end of the 2021 year end, the expenses of what they expended from 2021 to 22, and the operation funds they had on hand at the end of 2022 from their operating fund account. I'm going to also ask that they tell us what capital funds they had at the end of the 2021 fiscal year, what was expended in the 2021 to 22 year, and the capital funds on hand at the end of the 2022 year. And 3, I'd like to ask that they present the money they had received and had on hand from the federal government as of the fiscal year ending 2021, what was spent from 2021 to 2022, and the funds they had on hand at the end of the 2022 year end. It can be summarized, but I would like to see those figures. Then, the other issue, and this is the last issue I'll talk about, is we get into the issue of fund balance. Whereas the school board had in its operational account, somewhere, depending on who's doing the talking, between $30 and $35 million at the end of this past year. It says, most state funds, which the money they get from the state to school units, revert at the end of the fiscal year if not spent. So what they get from the state, if they don't spend it, it's got to go back to Raleigh. Thus, a school unit's fund balance is comprised primarily of county appropriations from the previous years. It says there is no prohibition against a school unit maintaining a fund balance. School units, however, do not need a fund balance to meet cash flow needs in the same extent that counties and municipalities do. And then they have a footnote. The most significant revenue source for counties and municipalities is property tax proceeds. Although property taxes typically are levied at the beginning of the fiscal year, July 1st, they may be paid without penalty until the following January. Thus, counties and municipalities rely heavily on fund balances to pay expenses during the first half of the year. Local school units do not have the same cash flow needs because they receive revenue dispersed from the state and county governments on a more regular basis throughout the fiscal year. So, and then it talks about, and I'm not going to get into the requirements of keeping the operational funds separate from the capital funds. I'm not going to get into how that the county commissioners can even require in the budgeting process that there's a chart of accounts that each item in the school board has to be itemized in the budgeting process. But what's needed for operations is one thing. What's needed from capital is another thing, and they should not be mixed up. Because as commissioners, we do not have the authority to go back. Once we budget funds, we do not have authority to go back and retrieve those funds. Once they're gone, they're gone. Well, if it's for expenditures, it's gone for expenditures. If it's capital, it's gone for capital, and it's gone. We do not control it after that. It says a county board may not force a school board to expend its fund balance for capital or operational expenditures. And a school unit is not authorized to return all or portion of its fund balance to the county. A county board, however, likely may consider the amount of fund balance available to the school unit when making its yearly county appropriations for operating expenses. So that's why what's in the operating account, if we feel like there's too much there, and there's $8 million that shouldn't be there, and remember that whatever, as it says, they don't need to have a big fund balance because we fund it, I believe, every month. Chad, is that correct? Every month. We provide those funds. And when money's just sitting over there not being used, and you know, this lady came in and talked about all that they weren't being able to get, and yet there was $30 million sitting in a checking account over there. And that's taxpayer money sitting in a checking account, not being used, where we taxed our citizens on their property when they're having a hard time with inflation and working hard, and that money is just sitting in a checking account, not being used. And so therefore, it's, that's our ability to get that in the right balance. And if it's moved to capital accounts, then we don't have a chance to do that. If the school board needs capital funds, they should bring a request in here, tell us what it's for, we'll allocate funds for that. So I just wanted to bring that up because I know ongoing conversations are being had. I wanted to be sure that we as commissioners knew as the best I could where we stood and what our authority was.
Thank you. Chad, I think you and Rick have a meeting with Dr. Bracy and Mr. Britt tomorrow, so in
We do.
the request, could you make those requests?
Yes, sir, I will. We will.
Can I add one to it?
Sure.
And again, I'm not trying to micromanage, but piggybacking on what Commissioner Smith said, I do believe if capital funds are being moved or requested, we have a right to know, A, what they're being used for, because I feel like I do watch the Board of Education meetings, and you hear a lot about things that aren't being done in schools, not taken care of, and how are we able to hold them accountable for these funds if we don't know what they're for. When we discussed the bond, we knew specific projects, and this is where these numbers came from. So if we don't know specifics, we're just handing them money and hoping they do what they say they're going to do.
You have the right to know what they're doing with those funds. When we talk to them tomorrow, projects are going to be the main point of discussion, not only for current projects or anything from the 2018 referendum that may be needed to be done. So we'll discuss all those. We'll have a list get a list from the schools based on those projects, and we'll get it to you.
All right. Vice Chairman, I know you were involved in most closely prepared our budget statement as well as talking with the school board. So I know you have some more information.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've all got to remember is this, if you go back to the original request that the school board sent over, they had a capital request, like you mentioned, Commissioner, but we chose not to fund that. We fund zero capital, and the reason we did that is because they had, at that point in time, about $25.5 million in fund balance, and we wanted to pare that fund balance down. The school folks agreed to that, and that's why they never went out and said anything negative about us not funding their capital. The $8 million transfer that they're asking for is in lieu of us not funding their capital. That's what it's coming. It's going to bring that fund balance number down. That's going to be 30-some, right at $30-some million. If we transfer that $8 million down, that brings it down to 20-something, and then there's some other issues that are probably going to come before this board that's going to bring it down even further. The target that sort of unofficially was kicked around here at some point, and we can debate that and discuss it and change it or whatever, was everybody kind of semi-unofficially agreed that about a $15 million fund balance was reasonable in the event of a catastrophic event. If our children goes down, they don't have to come up here and ask for money every time they need something, but not to exceed that. The days of having a $30, $40 million in fund balance is not acceptable. And I think they're understanding that now. I had conversations this afternoon about it. And so that $8 million is going to go toward bringing that fund balance down. There's going to be some other possible things coming that are pertaining to some security and safety of the schools that they're trying to do. That's probably they're going to ask to use some fund balance money of that is. And Chad is going to obtain a list of all those capital projects so that we can monitor those and make sure that what they're saying they're doing is what they're doing. And so I totally agree with what you're saying, but a lot of that is in motion right now. But our budget discussions, if you recall, when we had the 500,000 phone calls between all of us trying to get to a budget point, that was it. And I've even got the slide on my phone. I can get Paul to print it for us, where they initially asked for a certain amount of money. They were going to use a certain amount of ESSER funds. They had some additional funds they were going to use. And so their initial request, it included an $8.5 million fund balance transfer out of their fund balance into capital. That was the whole point in the beginning. And the reason we said zero capital was to bring down that fund balance. I mean, that was the point of it. Why would we fund their capital when they got $30 million in fund balance sitting there? So, I mean, we all agreed that that was kind of the route to go. And in the future board going forward, during the budget process, we can monitor, do exactly what Commissioner Smith's saying. We can hold that fund balance wherever it needs to be. And I think that's an important thing to do going forward. And the more important part of it is the folks that I'm talking to with the school board, they understand that. They're not fighting against it. So.
Well, Patrick, the problem is, a lot of that phone calls were on the side. Some of the things you said we as commissioners understood, I never understood,
Okay.
and I'm a commissioner.
Okay.
Those things need to be talked about in this room, not on the phone. When we're going to get to where we say it's this much operating money and this much capital, we need to talk about it in here, because we all represent taxpayers that we have to answer to. And the numbers that Chad gave me and the numbers that I have right here is that their fund balance was between $33 and $35 million. Now, if that changed, I've not been updated on that. I only go with what I hear here. I don't go to school board meetings. I have a day job, so I don't go chasing around trying to find every rumor and everything here. I base my votes and what I do on what we do in this room, and I expect that the information to be exchanged in this room.
Yeah, and I think there was, I mean, at least as I understand it, there was a request, albeit by email, for that I can't remember now, is it 8.5 or $8 million?
It's $8 million now.
Well, what was
It was 8.5.
but the request that we got in the email,
Originally was 8.5.
so 8.5. So I think the 35 that included the 8.5 that wasn't transferred, so you got to reduce that down to
Yes.
27.
But if you don't reduce that, the fund balance is closer to $35 million, and the law doesn't say anything about emails.
Yeah.
The law says something about a resolution that's presented to this board that this board approves.
I think the email was actually the email and had a resolution in it, but I think some of the things that we're getting clarified tomorrow is exactly what is that 8.5 consist of, which has been the question on both sides, some
Yeah.
clarification on that.
They do have low to mid-30s in fund balance. The transfer is what they want to send from current to capital, but that is, they did have some language in there. I just wasn't sure, based on all the conversations, if that's what it should have been. And so they've pared that down from 8.5 to 8. And as I'll reiterate again tomorrow, depending on what the board wants, they need to make a request here, and if they need to come in person or whatever the board wants, we'll have them do, and they're amenable to doing that.
They've offered to do either one.
Right.
If they
that's
need
right.
$8 million in capital, they don't need to transfer it out of they need to come in and say what, or at least they need to come in and specify what they need it for.
Yeah, I think that's
Not
what we're
just some
saying.
transfer.
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying.
I think tomorrow, we're going to speak to them, getting a list of what the 8 million is for, and if there's anything from the prior referendum that they still need to do, we need to have those as well, and I think they're working on that.
They are, and that'll be a different conversation.
That is a
But
different
once they
conversation.
get to that point that they know what that number's going to be, and that would also be pulled out of their fund balance to help further reduce that amount.
Yeah.
That was sort of their plan, and
Correct.
And they're open to come and present or do whatever. They've just relied on us to tell them what we want them to do, and so I think if we want them to come and put on a presentation, I'm sure they'll be happy to do that.
They have not resisted that.
No.
They just need to know if that's what we want them to do, and if that's the will of the board, they'll come
And they did
explain that.
submit their capital request to us, and we denied it. I mean, in the budget.
I
We
think,
funded zero. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, you're good. I think for transparency purposes, for citizens, just so they know that what we're approving is what we are being asked of instead of it just being assumptions.
Well, I also, the local government commission has their eyes on it as well, and so we have to be transparent, not only for your constituents out there, but the Local Government Commission, our auditors, when we approve transfers, rating agencies, all that has to be in the forefront of everybody's knowledge in terms of what's been going on, so that everybody's comfortable with what's been done. So
Our audit
It's very
just
important.
showed the amount we gave to school board. The actual justification is in the school board's audit, right? If we give them $50 million, our audit's going to show we gave them $50 million, not what they did with it.
No, whatever our appropriation is, that's what we show in our audit. They will show in their audit a transfer from current to capital. But it has to be, in their audit, their auditors will have to prove that this board met one of their requirements and approve it in this body.
All right, and I will add that just in my discussions, particularly with Mr. Britt during the developing the operational side budget, that the request, anytime I ask him for something in our conversations, or emails, whatever it was, that he was very forthcoming. And I think from my understanding from speaking with the board, as well as Dr. Bracy and Dr. Britt, that, you know, getting together, and I think us starting our process earlier in March allows us to work some of these details out, and I'm going to say use a formula to decide, you know, where we are, so that we're not dickering over, you know, what stuff goes to. We need to know in the capital side, but I think that there's a willingness, as been said, to sit down and have discussions earlier and clarifying conversations before they throw something out on the table, and then we have to respond to that. There's some preliminary conversations that can be had, and we could even discuss at our March meeting.
Yeah, and much like the cash flows that I put in front of you tonight that shows what we have through July, I have asked them to provide us similar cash flows. I walked that scenario through with Stephen, and he has been very forthcoming and has provided those types of documents to us. So before we get into the March meeting, we will not only have current expenses to what they have for fiscal year '23, I've also asked, and he's always provided projections of what they have, that what they will have as of June 30, 2023, so that when we go through our budgeting process, we kind of know what the actual expenses are related to what the school is doing.
I just think it's important to remember that when we funded zero for their capital, I think that was a good move based on the amount of money they had in fund balance. And then asking them to transfer out of their fund balance and reduce that number and utilize that money to fulfill their capital needs for this year is a win-win to everybody. I mean, it's a win to this board because we're doing two things. One, we save the tax dollars in this particular budget, but also we help pare down their fund balance, which is a goal as well. And so I've found a lot of cooperation. I've had conversations today, as a matter of fact, and, you know, it's even suggested that we meet more frequently, you know, and just kind of have conversation about, you know, what's the plan and kind of what they're wanting to do. I think there's a willingness, and Mr. Britt has been very forthcoming, and Chad, thank you for providing a gazillion. I know I've called you 100 times, but it's the information is there and it's good, and I think we're in a good spot. We just got to keep moving forward. I'm not going to get into the drama of the other stuff. I don't.
Well, I think that, as been said, the transparency of the entire board knowing, and if there's conversations that probably need to come back if the format's board comments, then the rest of the board be informed on any kind of conversations we have that impact our decisions. So,
well, if I dropped the ball on that, I apologize, because I had phone conversations with every single person on this board multiple times and walked through every single dollar that was being requested. And we talked about not funding the school's capital request. Do you remember that,
Yeah,
Mr. Governor?
yeah,
Okay.
I do.
And the reason we would do that is to ask them to use their fund balance money. And I hope the majority of the board remembers that conversation, because that, I mean, and if I didn't portray it the right way, I apologize. Mr. Smith, I apologize to you if you didn't.
That's okay. I'm just trying to make sure we do things the right way.
Yes, sir. I agree with you.
If Chairman had started on this side, he'd have been able to announce that ahead of time.
I broke tradition and started on the other side, but I appreciate that.
Well, and I don't disagree. And I appreciate your information that you provided, but I also have an obligation as being the one who had a lot of those conversations and was charged with crafting the budget motion and getting everybody's input on that. I felt like I needed to speak up and say, this is something that the school board knew about, and it's something that we knew about too. I mean, this was kind of something that was the plan when we didn't fund their capital. Okay. Now, so.
All right, so Commissioner Stevens,
I'm good.
no updates from your conference?
Oh, it was great. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah, I was
going to keep
gonna
y'all
say,
here any
we're
longer
not-
to hear
we're
about
not-
the sessions I sat
Well,
through.
look, hey, we're here now, so let's get it all out there while we're here.
I'm just going to add more to your plate, but I'll wait till we get through this first.
First of all, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to announce that I'll be presenting the order of long leaf pine to Adam Stanley Thursday night at 6 o'clock at the JCC, if anybody can come and attend.
What time is that?
6 p.m. And also, there's a lot I could say about what we have just talked about, but the only thing I'll say is I've never met a more, in 16 years, 17 years, I've never met more of a transparent person than Stephen Britt. I've never, ever, for the school. And I also know that Chad knows about as much about their finances as they do. And I understand that. But I'm not going to allow any drama for me to get involved in. Same as Patrick. There's a lot I could say. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Harris?
Oh, I've said enough. Thank you. I just appreciate it.
Commissioner Godwin?
Yeah, Commissioner Stevens and I did attend the association's annual conference in Concord, and I'll start out with Thursday morning what we, I'm not going to go.
You're going to go through each day, are you?
Yeah.
Day by day.
You're not going to
Breakfast on Thursday.
There were some very long sessions, but there was some good information, and some of it I've made a lot of notes. I've got several pages, but I'm going to pass on as the appropriate time and when the situation comes up. But I did want to say something now, because I will not be able to be at the first September meeting. I'll be out of town. That'll be, I think, the first meeting I've missed in 10 years, but
Well, sounds like that's going to be a wise day to miss based on all the stuff we got.
Yeah.
So
No,
you've chosen well.
one of the things that the last class I attended on Saturday had to do with veterans, and we had someone there from the State Veterans Affairs Office. And the governor proclaims the week of Veterans Day, which is on Friday this year, November 11th, as Veterans Week. And they're asking all the people in the state to observe it through Operation Greenlight. That's where all the public buildings are lit up in green during that week, and ask citizens to do that, at home, in the porch light, that sort of thing, just a green light to show support for the veterans. And they would like for us to adopt a resolution. I'll be working with clerk and council to prepare that and have it ready for that September meeting, because time's short. November will be here before you know it. So we need to prepare a resolution to be adopted by the board and forward it to the state, to the Veterans Affairs. Or it may be consolidated through our association.
Well, I was going to say, with 4 veterans on this board, I think that's very appropriate.
Yeah. And I think it's a simple act that the citizens can do that really make a big impact for veterans. It was a good conference, and made a lot of notes, and I'll be sharing them as time comes.
All right.
That's all.
Thank you.
What can I say? We spent the majority of the meeting talking about sewer. I'm happy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was kind of geeked out on that as well, so.
We'll talk about broadband next time.
And we did have a class on broadband,
So
too.
I will say, and I think you received we all received the quarterly, I think it's quarterly or monthly magazine from the County Commissioners Association, and it did have an article on broadband, and we were 42nd in access to broadband, which is not good. I guess the good news is we should have some information coming in, hopefully in the next few weeks, about who is the vendor selected for the broadband projects here in Johnston County. So hopefully we'll be moving up the list, but I don't think 42nd in the state is is good for anything. I don't think that's where we want to be, is in the middle of the pack.
In all the counties that applied for those grants, 23 have been acted on. The reason the others haven't been acted on is there have been some protests, and that is where ISP, the provider, maybe served an area that this other company had applied for a grant that overlaid that area. So there was a conflict there, and they protested, and the secretary said that it would take a 15-day turnaround on those delays, so on those protests. So we should know by the end of this month.
On a positive note, in my RV park, there's a lot of people that work for the cable people. They're putting in conduit and fiber optic line from the Virginia state line all the way to South Carolina state line on 95, 70 the full route, 301 the full route, and they're crisscrossing and they're getting ready for some big changes. So it's going to happen fast. We're going to change our position real quick.
The problem is the people in Johnston County who live on dirt road don't really
don't
really appreciate I-95.
Yeah, that's right. Them dead areas.
That's right. I'm in the dead area.
So I guess if it's my turn, I had a couple things. One, I did want to say I left off the list, but it's a longer term thing. It's the master plan. It's once we kind of get to the land use plan, to something like the master plan for our utilities. So that's just on the radar, not on the list yet. The second thing was I'd mentioned, and I think I'd sent an email out about March 15th and 16th for our retreat. So I see some of you responded, but if that works, I think Rick has sent something out to staff to kind of hold those dates. But if we could get that confirmed so we can look at our, like I said, a strategic planning, a day of strategic planning followed by a day of budget discussions, I think that would let us know so we can get that kind of, instead of penciled in, pinned in on that. So, and then the final thing, as the board representative on the JCC trustees, I did want to say we have started the presidential search process, which we hope will culminate sometime in January with a selection of a new president. So that process is underway, and I know Commissioner Harris is serving on that. We have one of the committees we have to do that. I know there are several folks throughout Johnston County who are participating on that. I want to thank them all for that and look forward to good things, continued growth and new opportunities. And I think, and I'm going to speak a little bit off the top of my head here, which is dangerous, but I think that out of the, for the Commissioner's Promise Program, they have had right at 200 applicants for that from high school graduates. So in our attempt to expand our workforce development, I think that will hopefully kick that into another level, and we can see folks who are graduate from our high schools get a vocational training or look for a 4-year degree and then wind up staying in Johnston County and be able to find jobs in Johnston County. So that's my three things. I think we have a need for a closed session, so Commissioner Smith.
I move the board go into closed session for the purpose of consulting with an attorney employed by the board in order to preserve attorney-client privilege pursuant to NCGS 143-318-11A3 to include Richard Nordan, Esquire, as administrator of the estate of Eric Cruz versus Michael Carson, Eastern District Court of North Carolina, file number 522-C23207-D, to discuss matters relating to the location or expansion of industries or other businesses in the area pursuant to NCG S143-318-11A4, and to establish or instruct staff concerning the negotiations of the price and terms of a contract concerning the acquisition of real property pursuant to NCGS 143-318-11A5 and NCGS 143-318-11AB for personnel.
Longest motion in history.
Hey, it kept on getting lower and lower as you were reading there. All right, we have a motion in a second.
Repeat that motion for us? I second.
Yes, we have a motion in a second, and I think Commissioner Harris beat you to it. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. And I would just say for our press who are here, Mr. Laster, thank you for being here in person. I think it's the first time we've seen somebody from the press in quite some time, so thank you for coming. And I don't think there will be any action taken after we come out of closed session. Okay. Well, thank you for keeping us on the toes. All right, with that, we'll take a few minutes to clear the room, and we'll go into closed session.